Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3281, Taking Them Back to the Inner World. The disciples in the Flow Sword sect had also witnessed the groundbreaking scene. They watched as the two giant figures of Emperor Charm and Eastern Emperor Tai fought fiercely, the sun versus the golden rune sword, respectively. Anxiously they rooted for their own leader, Eastern Emperor Tai. They hated to think about the consequences if he lost. Trish and Carrie kept on heading outside the courtyard house to inquire if there was any news. Letitia, however, decided to err on the side of caution and refused to leave the courtyard house. On the other hand, Margaret was surprisingly calm. She only asked about Zen a few times, concerned for her husband's safety. She didn't concern herself with other matters from the outside. The people in the courtyard continued to feel the earthquake as the battle raged on below. Initially, the ground trembled ever so slightly, but to their surprise, after a while, it felt like the whole mountain was sliding down. What would become of them if the huge mountain crashed? If it ever came to that, while the disciples of the three sects could easily flee by flying into the sky, they were still worried. To their relief, the sliding of the mountain lasted only for a short while, and then they felt the ground beneath their feet stabilize once more. Trish went out to inquire about the matter again and found out that the war in the Oneness Sky Palace had subsided. Relieved, she eagerly returned to relay the news to the others. Just then, Zen landed in the courtyard. When the women saw Zen, joy filled their faces as they rushed towards him. Although they believed that Zen would return to them in one piece, they had been worried since the Oneness Sky Palace was almost destroyed. When they knew their beloved husband was facing powerful warriors of the Sun Crow race, there was nothing they could do but silently pray for his safety. Thus, seeing him return to them unharmed was a huge relief. After Zen, Letitia, Margaret and the other girls had settled down, Edna quietly walked out from a corner and asked in a low voice, "Creator, is the evil god safe?" Zen had corrected her several times before, telling her not to call him Creator. It seemed, however, that she was incapable of changing her ways. At the mention of the evil god, Zen frowned slightly. While Edna saw his abrupt change in expression, her heart sank. Could it be that the evil god had died? She knew that her husband had already been refined into an inner world generating avatar, which was equivalent to Zen's avatar puppet. In this case, no matter how powerful the evil god was, it would be difficult for him to betray Zen. He was most likely dead. Edna was fully prepared to accept this. He has escaped, Zen said helplessly, his frown deepening. Escaped, she echoed in surprise. How is that possible? Zen shrugged. The fact that the evil god was able to escape was purely an accident. In theory, it was impossible for the evil god to disobey Zen's orders. However, when he was faced with the creatures he wasn't able to kill, he was able to flee, taking advantage of Zen's order to prioritize his freedom. Sorry, Edna apologized, her face full of shock. Zen shook his head. It's not your fault. I was negligent. Don't worry. I'll find him sooner or later. Zen knew that even if the evil god had found a way to escape, he was still his inner world generating avatar. If they met each other one day, as long as they were close enough in proximity, the evil god wouldn't be able to disobey Zen. Then, can I return to your inner world? Edna asked. She considered leaving his inner world as a gift from Zen. Now that the evil god had wronged him, she felt that she didn't deserve this gift. She knew that the evil god would always find ways to disobey Zen. However, she also was under the impression that the inner world generating avatar was strong enough to suppress the evil god. She never thought he'd be able to run away like this. Thinking about this made her uneasy. Zen glanced at Edna indifferently. I came back here to take Tia, Margaret, and Aura back to the inner world. If you don't want to return with them, I won't force you. There was no rebirth land for Edna in Zen's inner world. Once she left, it was impossible to find she back. But, he continued, the source world is not peaceful recently. If you travel alone in this world, the chances of finding the evil god are very small. Edna was considered one of the top warriors in Zen's inner world, but in the source world, she was quite weak. With her talent, it was possible she would be able to reach the other shore realm, but it was still a futile mission. Hearing Zen's words, Edna was stunned for a moment. Then, her eyes lit up excitedly, like a prisoner who had seen the sun for the first time in years. Creator, are you willing to let me go? If that's what you want, I won't stop you, Zen repeated. Then, I want to leave, Edna said firmly. She could stay in Zen's inner world and wait for the evil god to return, but what she really wanted was to search for him. No matter how dangerous it was, she didn't care. But my children are still in your inner world. Although she loved the evil god, their ways were different. As a mother, she cared for her children deeply. I won't interfere with the development of my inner world. I believe you know that, Zen replied indifferently. In most cases, Zen would allow his inner world to evolve, and he wouldn't interfere anything unless someone as reckless as evil god appeared. Edna nodded. She felt reassured. Her creator was a man of his word, after all. Without further hesitation, she took her leave. Now that the Oneness Sky Palace was recovering from the turmoil of war, the chances of someone stopping her were slim. I've already brought Lavender and the others into my inner world. You can also stay there to avoid any danger. Especially you, Margaret. You need a peaceful environment, Zen said, turning to face her. Margaret must have changed a lot while he was gone. She nodded meekly, with no objections. When they heard that Zen was going to take the women into his inner world, Trish and Carrie exchanged worried glances. In the past few years, Zen's status in the Oneness Sky Palace climbed each day. Consequently, as his maids, Trish's and Carrie's status had also been elevated, at least, among the rest of the maids of the Flow Sword sect. Even the other disciples were courteous to them. They had never experienced such respect before Zen came into their lives. Moreover, the two of them had silently agreed that they would devote their lives to Zen. Now that Zen was gathering his family to move them back to his inner world, the two maids felt uneasy. Mr. Luo, are you not coming back to the Flow Sword sect? Trish asked boldly. Zen glanced at Trish and realized shamefacedly that he had completely ignored the two maids. The Oneness Sky Palace is not peaceful now, he said carefully. If you two are willing to enter my inner world, you can also. Zen was still a little hesitant. After all, the two maids were born in the source world, he was afraid they wouldn't be willing to live in a small inner world. Yet, to his surprise, before he could even finish speaking, Trish and Carrie shouted in unison, that would be great. Seeing that they couldn't wait to enter his inner world, Zen realized that his hesitation was unnecessary. Chapter 3282, The Captain of the Black Ship. The following days were busy. The Oneness Sky Palace was focused on clearing up the battlefield. Emperor Charm and the Bearing race had only managed to destroy the Oneness Mountain and the Dragon City, and the Phoenix Palace had suffered the most damages. Majority of the palace was smashed to pieces. They had no other choice but to rebuild it. A few days had passed before the reinforcements from the Pear Hill finally arrived. Before the Sun Crow race even launched their general attack, the Oneness Sky Palace had already sensed the unrest and sent for the Pear Hill, asking them for help. However, the distance between the Pear Hill and the Bloom Divine Province was too long. Besides, the real problem didn't lie in the distance. Just as the reinforcements of the Pear Hill were about to embark on the journey to the Bloom Divine Province, powerful warriors of the Divine Farmer race suddenly showed up in the north of their territory to wreak havoc. But once the warriors of the Pear Hill showed up to face the Divine Farmer race, they quickly retreated. It then became clear to them that the Divine Farmer race had just distracted them from helping the Oneness Sky Palace. But even then, they could do nothing about it. Fuxi had left the Source World because of something important, while the Snake Goddess was busy trying to rescue Eastern Emperor Tai from the other shore. The Divine Farmer race repeated the operation for several times. Their powerful warriors neither launched attacks nor fled away. They just dawdled along the north area, taunting the Pear Hill teasingly. Although there were also many powerful warriors in the Pear Hill, they couldn't risk leaving it unguarded. It was not until the powerful warriors of the Divine Farmer race retreated that they dispatched over 60 people to the Oneness Sky Palace. However, the battle in the Oneness Sky Palace had already come to an end by the time they arrived. When they heard the news that Emperor Charm had been killed, the powerful warriors from the Pear Hill were shocked. In their opinion, if Emperor Charm came to the Bloom Divine Province in person, only the Snake Goddess and Fuxi themselves were strong enough to defeat him. To their surprise, however, it seemed that the Oneness Sky Palace had defeated Emperor Charm on their own. Pierce smiled at them hospitably, but he didn't tell them all the details. In his mind, what had happened to Zen was inconceivable. Even if these things were to be disclosed, the only one who should talk about it was Eastern Emperor Tai himself. Meanwhile, from outside the chaos, everything was covered in darkness. No light, no matter how strong, could illuminate it. Even if thousands of suns were thrown into the chaos, they would only look like specks of dust amidst the darkness. There were, however, chaos clouds that emitted faint, brown light. Among these chaos clouds lurked a huge black ship. The black ships had always been notorious for being hard to find. This one was a little special. The front end of the ship was made of 7-star obsidian stones, and on both sides of the ship, there were blurry words carved. They looked like enlarged Sanskrit words. Swoosh! Just as the black ship emerged from the chaos clouds, a huge set of 8 diagrams suddenly appeared in front of it. The black ship's path was blocked. It had no choice but to stop above the chaos clouds. As the 8 diagrams spun furiously, Fuxi appeared behind. 8 diagrams rope, Fuxi shouted. 8 sets of the 8 diagrams quickly appeared on all sides of the black ship, firmly holding the black ship to the spot. In terms of strength, Fuxi was confident he could defeat any eternal warrior in the source world, even this mysterious captain of this black ship. But Fuxi had an Achilles heel. His speed was ever so slightly inferior. The reason why the Thunder Dimorphodon had managed to escape from Fuxi's grasp was because of its avatars and speed. If Fuxi had managed to catch the Thunder Dimorphodon, one punch from him and it would be dead. This time, however, Fuxi had learned from his previous mistakes. The minute he determined the location of the captain, he immediately trapped him. Swish, swish, a wisp of black smoke suddenly floated, rolling continuously till it formed the silhouette of a hooded cloak. The figure wearing the cloak could not be seen clearly. In fact, no one had ever seen what the captain actually looked like. His existence was more of a symbol, even in the eyes of the members of the black ship. "Oh, I didn't know the human sovereign was visiting. What can I do for you?" the captain asked flatly. "The descending rings of our chaotic source world were taken away by the Thunder Dimorphodon," Fuxi answered coldly. "Human sovereign," the captain replied indifferently. "Then you can find the Thunder Dimorphodon and take them back from it." Fuxi snorted. Raising his hand, he threw something into the air. A ring unfolded, from which a huge bat's head slowly fell out. When the person in the hooked cloak saw the bat's head, his body trembled slightly. The Thunder Dimorphodon, one of the top 10 ferocious beasts in the chaos, had been killed by Fuxi. "Just because I haven't made a move in years, some idiots have already forgotten their place," Fuxi snarled. "They must be tired of living." As soon as he finished speaking, Fuxi threw a punch at the bat's head. A fist mark with the shadow of 8 diagrams was imprinted on the bat's head. Pop! The Thunder Dimorphodon's head instantly burst into fine powder. The top 10 ferocious beasts in the chaos were forces to be reckoned with. In fact, their strength was comparable to that of an eternal warrior. However, a force as formidable as the Thunder Dimorphodon was still killed by Fuxi. Indeed, Fuxi was quite terrifying. "The Thunder Dimorphodon has taken away 12 descending rings, and 6 of them have fallen into your hands." "Give them back to me," Fuxi said impatiently. Divine Farmer and Yellow Thirk had offered the Thunder Dimorphodon a handsome price to help them. However, the Thunder Dimorphodon hadn't expected that, after being rewarded, he'd be chased by Fuxi until the end. The first few times, it had managed to escape. Ultimately, however, Fuxi captured it. Before the Thunder Dimorphodon died, it had disclosed to Fuxi the whereabouts of the 12 descending rings. 6 went to the Divine Farmer, while the other 6 had been forcibly taken from it by this black ship. After thinking for a while, Fuxi had decided it would be better to go after the black ship. After a moment of silence, the captain said slowly, "Human sovereign, do you really think I can be trapped by just an 8 diagrams rope?" His black ship had crisscrossed the chaos and the source world. Even though he had pissed off many super forces, he managed to get away each time. That was all because he had a terrifying ability to escape. "What if I told you I have a ring of prediction?" Fuxi asked coldly. Standing on the deck, the captain in the hooded cloak seemed to be lost in thought once more. After a long time, he sighed quietly. As he stretched out a hand, 3 descending rings appeared. "I can return 3 descending rings to you, but on one condition. If you agree, I will tell you some more valuable information." When Fuxi saw the 3 descending rings, he felt a little surprised. He had thought that he would have a fierce battle with the black ship. He hadn't expected the captain would give up half of the descending rings so easily. "What condition?" asked Fuxi, eyebrow raised curiously. "I want those golden-red chaotic source spirits in exchange," said the captain bluntly. Golden-red chaotic source spirits? Fuxi was dazed for a few seconds. Then, it hit him. After the mother of the chaotic source spirits was killed, Zen had dug out some special chaotic source spirits. At the time, Yan had gifted one of them to Fuxi, so he could study it. Even though Fuxi had pondered over it for a long time, he still hadn't found a way to refine it. Chapter 3283, Contract Restricting Twin-Headed Snake. Fuxi immediately understood what was behind the black ship captain's words. Until then, he had been misinterpreting things. The golden-red chaotic source spirits weren't used to strengthen one's power. Instead, they were necessary when something needed to descend into the chaos. And what if I refuse the exchange? Fuxi then asked. 30 golden-red chaotic source spirits remained in Yan's hands. As far as he knew, Zen had obtained most of the remaining spirits. Regardless of whether or not the golden-red chaotic source spirits were of great use, Fuxi didn't think it necessary to make the deal with the black ship's captain. He was there to make him hand over the descending rings, not make a deal with the man. If you don't agree to my terms of exchange, you will never get the descending rings from me, believe it or not, replied the captain of the black ship. The chaos is vast, he added. It will be easy for me to hide several descending rings from you. Fuxi's face darkened, and a cruel glint flashed in his eyes. He began gathering his power as he threatened, it seems you're still unwilling to admit defeat. Admit defeat? The black ship's captain only smiled faintly and said, Human sovereign, you truly have the power to be confident. But have you ever considered why it was so easy for you to find the black ship that comes and goes without a trace in the source world? Fuxi's face seemed to turn cautious upon hearing this. Quietly, he took a look around and examined his surroundings. A black wisp of aura circled the place, something he had failed to detect because of the dark surroundings. The captain's intent was clear. He knew that Fuxi was tracking the black ship, so he had purposely set a trap for Fuxi, giving himself a chance to negotiate with the latter about the golden-red chaotic source spirits. I don't have many spirits with me, Fuxi said, stretching out his hand. The only one he had received from Yan then appeared in his palm. 2 golden beams of light flashed under the captain's cloak. How many more of them can you get? He asked, sounding excited. About 30, Fuxi answered. He reported only the number of chaotic source spirits in Yan's hand. While he could ask Zen for more, Fuxi didn't want the black ship's captain to get his hands on too many. We want all of them, claimed the captain of the black ship. Don't you think you're being too greedy? Fuxi said with a frown. Not at all, I know you can get more if you want, answered the other nonchalantly. While the black ship had plans to plunder Zen's, they hadn't had time to carry them out. Even without mentioning Zen, though, his threat was clear as day. Alright, I'll give you all of them. But you have to tell me what's wrong with the descending rings, Fuxi demanded calmly. After killing the Thunder Dimorphodon, Fuxi had tried to scour the beast's memory. But it had used a secret technique to jumble up its memories, setting a trap in its soul before it could be killed. It was this trap Fuxi nearly fell into as he extracted the beast's memories. Of course, I will tell you about it. But everything must be done in accordance with the contract, the captain spoke, rolling up his sleeve. From under his sleeve, a living other shore token slowly crawled out, revealing a twin-headed snake. Its scales were of 2 brilliant colors, the head on the left was a bright red while the head on the right was a deep blue. The snake hissed aggressively out in the open. Is this a contract-restricting twin-headed snake? Once Fuxi identified the snake, his expression was flooded with astonishment. Human sovereign, once you return to the Pear Hill, I won't be able to touch you. To honor our contract, please choose a snake head, announced the captain of the black ship. The contract-restricting twin-headed snake was another shore token of stage 33 of the other shore. It was the kind with strange habits and exceptionally powerful abilities. Usually, it appeared before warriors who encountered desperate situations on stage 33, otherwise known as the Three Purities stage. Previously, Fuxi had been forced into a desperate situation, having been chased by a swarm of powerful bees in a pool of the Three Purities stage. At the very end of the pool, he bumped into a contract-restricting twin-headed snake that had offered to bail him out of danger, but he was required to complete a task for it in return. Back then, Fuxi was left with no choice but to accept the terms. It was his means of survival. Once he agreed, the twin-headed snake followed through on its end of the contract. And afterwards, to keep his promise, Fuxi spent 5,000 to 6,000 years on the edge of the Three Purities stage to complete the snake's contract. No one knew of the snake's nature, it seemed to appear before those who needed help. It was a miraculous creature. Some regarded it as a kind of mascot, while others saw it as a curse. But fulfilling its contracts was no easy task. Breaching it also meant a terrible price. Most people who had been to the three purities stage had either witnessed or heard of this magical creature. But no one had ever managed to fuse with it as another sure token for them to carry in their inner world and bring to the chaos. As the snake twisted its body, the red head suddenly spoke out in human language, "The contract is bound by lethal poison. So long as you keep your promise, the poison will be detoxified. Choose a snake head and make your contract now." "It makes no difference to me," Fuxi exclaimed. In the next moment, he rushed to the deck and reached out to the twin-headed snake. Whoosh! The red snake head then bit Fuxi's arm at lightning speed. Its venomous fangs didn't pierce the skin, instead, it left a unique bite mark. Simultaneously, the blue snake head bit on the captain's arm. And so the contract and its restrictions came into effect at the same time. Both Fuxi and the black ship's captain were under their influence completely. Once they were bound to the contract, the black ship's captain handed 3 descending rings to Fuxi as he explained, "These descending rings indeed help other shore creatures descend into the chaos, but they can't avoid the punishment of the truth. I've tried several times, every creature that descends into the chaos ends up being eradicated by the truth." He promptly detailed the results of using the descending rings to Fuxi. As Fuxi listened to his explanations, he realized that if it were him, he'd attribute the problem to the lack of golden red chaotic source spirits as well. He understood why the captain of the black ship wanted to obtain them. But a thought came to his mind just then, and his expression changed upon remembering it. It was no secret that Zen had obtained most of the chaotic source spirits. Both the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race must have known of it. If the Yellow Thirk along with the others also aimed at the golden red chaotic source spirits, that meant Zen and the Oneness Sky Palace would also likely be in great trouble. "Please send your men to the Pear Hill. I will ask someone to hand over the golden red chaotic source spirits to you. I need to leave now." After cupping hands, Fuxi employed the grand teleportation technique to quickly travel through the chaos. "He is in such a hurry, looks like he figured it out, but it's all too late," murmured the black ship's captain once Fuxi left. "I bet the Oneness Sky Palace must have been conquered by now." As Fuxi chased after the black ship, it had kept a close eye on the Oneness Sky Palace. So he knew all there was to know about the war between the Oneness Sky Palace and the Sun Crow race. But the result hadn't yet reached the black ship's captain. He believed that the Oneness Sky Palace was doomed. Chapter 3284, The Land of Ashes. 4 days had passed since the Oneness Sky Palace stabilized, and Zen finally got into his inner world. The moment he transformed into his incarnation, he spotted a huge round leaf that hovered in the sky. This leaf floated and rotated in midair, and glowed with a light green hue. Zen's eyes widened at the sight of the leaf. With a flash, he came to the side of the leaf. Right above the leaf were human beings who happened to be busy. They were carving strange arrays across the leaf. Apparently, they were from the human race's civilization artifact, and they belonged to the human race of the 77th Chaos. When Zen created a separate continent for them, they never stopped building in his inner world. "Excuse me, but what is this leaf?" Zen asked into the air, hoping one of them to answer. One of them looked up as he recognized Zen's voice. After all, he was their ruler. However, though Zen was their ruler, they were a cocky race. Because they were not born and raised in Zen's inner world, they did not revere him with respect and authority. "It's the divine aura leaf," one of them responded, without even looking up. "And what is its use?" Zen continued. "It has the ability to speed up cultivations of all the creatures in the world," the same man responded. After hearing this, Zen paced around to get a better look at the leaf. He didn't realize that the primeval Lord of Heaven would have these people cultivate such a useful feat in his inner world. He walked towards the edge of the leaf and small balls were floating a few feet away. "What are those?" "They are transformation balls," the man replied, and without hesitation, he continued to explain. "Any true God can enter the transformation ball to cultivate, strengthen their souls, and make necessary preparations to enter the other shore." "And what are those storms in the distance?" Zen asked, pointing towards the dense gray clouds. Looking around, Zen did not expect the primeval Lord of Heaven and the rest to build so many things while he was gone. Because he was gone for so long, Zen didn't know that the primeval Lord of Heaven gathered the vast majority of the elites in the 77th Chaos. Back then, they had created the most suitable cultivation methods and the most convenient methods, too. After the primeval Lord of Heaven confirmed Zen's inner world was indeed a primitive land, he put a lot of hard work into making it what it was now. Aside from using the inner world as land, he also explored Zen's inner world in detail, including the forbidden lands and the composition of the races. Afterwards, he asked Fuxi and the rest to come up with a plan that would change the inner world completely. No matter what, Zen believed in these humans and their potential. It was no surprise that he'd gifted the primeval Lord of Heaven with full disposal of his inner world. He was just surprised to see that it had been rebuilt and improved in such a short period of time. In fact, not only did the primeval Lord of Heaven modify the world, he had also guided it single-handedly. In the past, Zen's world structure was simple. This was when the powerful warriors in the entire world were controlled by the evil god, and soon after, Edna and her clan controlled them. At that time, they wanted to control the inner world and had no interest in strengthening the humans. This was what made them such brutal tyrants. However, after the primeval Lord of Heaven took control of the world, he completely changed the dynamic. This birthed the ancient legends that told people about the divine gate that led to the heaven. When one reached the true God realm, they could step into the divine gate and reach such paradise. In addition, they provoked the battles among several great forces, which sent the cultivation atmosphere to grow tense. Left and right, all sorts of creatures cultivated themselves to grow stronger. In the end, this was what the primeval Lord of Heaven wanted to see. Buzz. Just as Zen finally grasped all the new knowledge, wisps of golden light flashed in the distance, rocketing into the sky. Then what is it? Zen asked curiously. That, I'm not sure, the man replied, looking puzzled as ever. The flashing lights seemed odd, so Zen took it upon himself to find out. He teleported right to the place where the golden light was shining. There, he was shocked to be among a lot of large, golden pillars. In the center of the pillars stood the primeval Lord of Heaven, looking up at them with a big, genuine smile across his face. The truth of 5 orientations, the truth of eternal sword intent and the truth of void destruction. Zen looked around as he noticed the words etched on each pillar. In total, there were 14 golden pillars, 13 of which had the truths of godly ways recorded on them. However, one of the pillars was completely blank. Why did you engrave the truths of godly ways here? Zen asked politely. The primeval Lord of Heaven sighed. This is for the cultivation of the creatures in the primitive land. You might have forgotten, but because this is the primitive land, people here can reach the other shore once they comprehend the truth of godly way. Was it possible for the creatures in his inner world to be on the other shore with him? Zen had never thought about it. This blank golden pillar. Zen spoke out, but the primeval Lord of Heaven interrupted. I plan to engrave the truth of 3 energy construction on it. As he walked towards the blank pillar, he added, however, as you said, King Manard only imparted the truth of 3 energy construction to you. I won't ask you to engrave it just yet. We may discuss things when we see King Manard. Then we can go now, Zen said enthusiastically. This was perfect, especially since Zen already agreed to visit King Manard along with the primeval Lord of Heaven before. Because of the war in the Oneness Sky Palace, their meeting had been severely delayed. The primeval Lord of Heaven's eyes lit up. That is good. He did not mean to be abrupt, but he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After they shook hands, Zen dissipated his incarnation while the primeval Lord of Heaven summoned people from the book. Right there and then, the energy souls of Fuxi, the snake goddess, Emperor Charm, Zhurong, Gonggong and the others appeared beside the primeval Lord of Heaven. Each of them had a personal interest in King Manard, but mostly, they wanted to meet King Manard who created the second other shore in the Land of Ashes. Meanwhile, after dispersing his incarnation, Zen reappeared in his room, sitting cross-legged. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to silently activate the truth of 3 energy construction. Buzz. After a few moments of silence, a mysterious truth of godly ways surrounded him and he appeared in another space. It was not someplace unfamiliar, because this was the space Mount had exiled him to before. He opened his eyes and looked around. In the distance, the ruins connected, and eventually formed a long, thin, trash belt. Not long after, the primeval Lord of Heaven led his group and they all appeared right above Zen's head. There were over 30 heads floating above him. Seeing so many heads, Zen couldn't help but be a little tense. However, the primeval Lord of Heaven and the others did not let petty worries bother them. Their eyes widened as they tried to familiarize themselves with the space. Everything in the Land of Ashes should have been destroyed, but these things were preserved so well. This is incredible, the primeval Lord of Heaven spoke out, admiring this special space. What's more incredible is that King Manard has also transformed this world into another shore, the snake goddess pointed out. Chapter 3285, Zia Zhang. After moving along the trash belt for some time, they saw the dim light of the deleting pillars in the distance. On his first time coming here, Zen had been disoriented and become a captive of those little monsters. This time, he was more level-headed and could appreciate the scenery. Crack, 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 As they passed through the trash city, a few one-eyed monsters would crawl out of the remains and stare at them with wide-eyed awe. These monsters no longer had enmity with Zen, but when he passed, they would constantly jump around to surround him. These creatures all have very special auras, the snake goddess remarked. It was not every day that the snake goddess and the others found something special. They had lived through many chaotic eras and witnessed the births of countless creatures on the other shore. They'd seen the unique creatures of the metal civilization and the regal jade civilization, so their shock threshold was set quite high. Judging only from their appearance, these one-eyed little monsters looked ordinary, but, just as the snake goddess said, the auras they exuded were special. In fact, they felt similar to the truth of 3 energy constructions Zen released. Zen opted to provide them with an explanation. The truth of 3 energy construction is composed of 3 kinds of energy which allows me to construct things out of the void at will. 3 kinds of monsters reside here, and it seems that King Manard distributed the 3 kinds of energy among them. Curiosity filled the snake goddess's eyes. Oh, is that so? Among all the heroes, she had always been the most curious, always inquisitive about what was happening in the world. This was the reason why the snake goddess in the source world often went out to explore, desperate to search for the human race on the other shore. The primeval Lord of Heaven continued to size up his surroundings and contemplated their situation. As they passed through the remains, the small star suddenly appeared. On this planet was a huge statue. This is the statue of King Manard, Zen told them. All eyes were fixed onto the statue, interested to know what he looked like and what kind of person he was. There was no way King Manard, who was very clear about the finale way of the human race, could be an unknown figure in the human race. He was the one who knew what other shore tokens had been used and who executed the plans. There was a moment of silence as everyone took their time to look at his statue. Quote, 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 it was Zen who first spoke. Can any of you recognize him? He asked. No, I've never seen him before. The response was unanimous. None of them knew who King Manard was. Zen shrugged. It doesn't matter. Once you meet him, you'll know who he is. He gently leapt onto the planet and flew towards the deleting pillars. King Manard's palace was located at the node between the pillars, and it was not difficult to find it. Not long after, Zen arrived at the door of the palace just in time for Hui, Snake Goddess, and all the other phantoms to retreat back into his inner world. 2 figures greeted him, a handsome man and an enchanting woman who were both disciples of King Manard. These 2 were the only ones who stayed while King Manard led his other disciples to explore outside the chaos. They knew Zen very well and greeted him with gladness and respect. Zen, the handsome man greeted by cupping his hands in front of him. Zen returned the gesture. May I know if your master, King Manard, is in the palace? The king was always out exploring the outside of chaos, and it was not an easy feat to find him. Fortunately, the handsome disciple nodded. Yes, he is meditating in the palace. Have you got any news about the human race on the other shore? The 2 disciples grew up in this world and could only imagine what the chaos on the other shore looked like. However, they were concerned about their master's wish. Zen nodded. Yes, I have. The handsome man's eyes crinkled with joy. His master would be very happy to hear the news. I'll go and ask my master to come out, he exclaimed with enthusiasm. He quickly turned around to summon King Manard while the enchanting woman invited Zen in. A few seconds later, Zen heard a hearty laugh just as a figure appeared beside him. Haha, Zen, you've only been away for a short time, but you already have news about the human race on the other shore. There was expectation on his face, but it was tinged with a hint of doubt. Legitimate news or groundless rumors? King Manard asked. He had previously gathered a bit of information about the human race on the other shore, courtesy of Zen, the regal jade spirit, and no. 9527. Traces of the human race popped up here and there, but they were terribly good at hiding themselves from their opponents. Even the top 10 civilizations, such as the regal jade civilization, had never found them on the other shore. There was very little chance for Zen to have found them on his own. I assure you, what I have aren't groundless rumors, Zen assured King Manard with a smile. The king stared at him with a cautious look in his eyes. Upon closer inspection, he could see numerous souls curling up in Zen's body. Buzz, Snake Goddess, Fuxi, Hui, Emperor Charm, Gonggong, Zhurong. One by one, the former heroes of the human race floated above Zen's head, with the primeval Lord of Heaven coming in last. The sight of all these people rendered King Manard speechless. The primeval Lord of Heaven was the first to speak. I've heard about you from Zen. He told me that you are very familiar with our methods of completing the finale way in the past. You are by no means a nameless person in our human race. King Manard is not your real name. This declaration echoed through the hall as the primeval Lord of Heaven uttered his critical question, who on earth are you? Plop. To everyone's surprise, King Manard plopped down onto the floor and knelt in front of the primeval Lord of Heaven. Even Zen wasn't expecting this. Master. King Manard's voice was full of excitement and adoration as he kowtowed. Even his two disciples were shocked. They had never seen him like this before. The primeval Lord of Heaven, whom King Manard was calling, was also confused. He had accepted 12 disciples in the past and only these 12 had the privilege of calling him, Master. After failing to complete the finale way, some died and a few others left. Nevertheless, he recalled every single one of their faces. Who was this King Manard? Seeing the slight embarrassment on the primeval Lord of Heaven's face, King Manard quickly remembered the fact that he had changed his appearance years ago, over 1,000 chaotic eras to be more precise. Even his own aura had undergone a tremendous change. Of course his old master wouldn't be able to recognize him. King Manard quickly raised his hand and gently brushed his face, activating the truth of 3 energy construction. His face began to morph until it returned to its original appearance. Zia Zhang, Zia, unbelievable, Zia, you are still alive. Tian, Zhang Zia was an ancient Chinese military strategist, and also a main character in the popular novel Function Bang written over 500 years after his lifetime. Everyone immediately recognized him once he revealed his true appearance. Chapter 3286, Forging Bodies. The snake goddess, Fuxi, and the others regarded Zia as a junior. The ancient human civilization had miserably ended because they failed to complete the finale way. It was so tragic that even when the human ancestor sacrificed himself, it still didn't stop the disaster. At that time, Zia had a great reputation among the human race, but he wasn't the central figure in the battle of the finale way. In other words, no one in the chaos had noticed him. Who would have thought that he would be banished to the land of ashes, also known as the deleting space? Then, over 1,000 chaotic eras had passed, and he met his master, the primeval Lord of Heaven, again. Of course, he was quite excited. Zia, it was safe to say that a being like the primeval Lord of Heaven had seen through the vanity of life. He, however, was enthusiastic to see his beloved disciple. Meanwhile, Zen pursed his lips. He didn't expect King Manard to be the disciple of the primeval Lord of Heaven. How did you get exiled to the land of ashes? The primeval Lord of Heaven asked. Zia was lost in thought. It was a long time ago, so he found it hard to recall the details of the past. After a while, he began to tell the primeval Lord of Heaven about how he got exiled and what had happened in this space. Zen listened quietly and he found that he had heard about some of those things before, but this time, Zia had everything spelled out. Although Zia was the primeval Lord of Heaven's disciple, he wasn't weak compared to the eternal warriors such as the snake goddess and Hui. In fact, he had led many powerful warriors to step into the eternal realm and become the eternal warriors during the 77th chaos. Among the 12 disciples of the primeval Lord of Heaven, Zia was the most important. The primeval Lord of Heaven let out a long sigh after Zia had explained what happened in the past, including the events in the deleting space. Back then, we had absorbed the quintessence of the elders and made 10 plans, but in the end, we failed. Since then, the element spirit race has suppressed us. I didn't expect that you still got a chance to find such a place, he said. When Zia saw his master sigh, he was confused. What do you mean? He asked. The primeval Lord of Heaven stared at him and said, we have fought against the element spirit race on the other shore for an exit for a long time. We still haven't attained that exit, and now, it's still in their hands. That is one of the reasons we are trapped in stage 33. Exit, Master, do you mean there is an exit in stage 33? Zia asked again. He was also an eternal warrior and had been to stage 33. However, the human race's understanding of the other shore was far from thorough as it was now when he had been in stage 33. Therefore, he didn't know that there was an exit there. Yes, the primeval Lord of Heaven said with piqued interest. Over the years, I've had many speculations about the outside of the chaos, but I can't prove them if I don't go there in person. Zia, please take me there so I can have a look, he asked. Sure, Zia readily agreed. He got up, but he seemed to have remembered something. He turned to Zen and said, please come with me. I want to help my master and the elders forge their bodies. He waved his hand as he spoke, and instantly transported both of them to another place. Since he could control the time and space in the deleting space, he was the one who had the final say. They walked through some winding paths for a while, and then Zen saw a small mountain that was several hundred feet high in front of him. This mountain seemed to be a part of the ruins. Its surface was wet and sticky like watery soil. King, what's this, Master Zia? Zen asked curiously. Zia smiled and said, this is the Nirvana clay. Zen simply blinked as he didn't know what the Nirvana clay was. On the other hand, the primeval Lord of Heaven, the snake goddess, and the others looked at it curiously. As far as I know, there shouldn't be such a thing in the source world, right? The primeval Lord of Heaven said. The snake goddess and the others believed that everything in the deleting space was deleted from the source world. However, the Nirvana clay was a kind of other shore token that could help the other shore creatures rebuild their bodies. Thus, it shouldn't be in this place. It doesn't come from the source world or the other shore. I brought it back from the abstruse energy world, Zia said with a smile. You can bring things back from the abstruse energy world? The snake goddess asked in shock. As for the primeval Lord of Heaven, he knew that there was another world outside the chaos, but he had never seen that world. But since Zia had named that world the abstruse energy world, then they also used that name. I was lucky. I can forge your bodies with the Nirvana clay, but the new bodies can only live in the deleting space, Zia stated. After he spoke, he stretched out his hand towards the small mountain of Nirvana clay and gently scratched it. Soft clay fell off the mountain wall, turned into human shapes and slowly walked down the slope. As the human-shaped clay walked down, their faces, hair, and features slowly formed. At the same time, Zia activated the truth of 3 energy construction to make clothes for them. Because the primeval Lord of Heaven and the others were in Zen's body, their energy souls had appeared as the other shore tokens. Thus, their energy souls could leave as long as Zen allowed. Whoosh, 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 the energy souls all drilled into the bodies made of the Nirvana clay. Naturally, Zia was ecstatic when he saw the former masters, elders, and powerhouses have reappeared in front of him. It was just like he had returned to the 77th chaos, the world of starry regions humans had dominated. Once the heroes had adapted to their new bodies, he led them to the cave. It was hard to dig this cave, and the cave itself was quite small, so everyone entered one by one. Zia, the primeval Lord of Heaven, and the snake goddess walked in the front. Zen had been in there once, so he was the last one to enter. While Zen waited for his turn, he heard the regal jade spirit's voice from his inner world that said, Zen, Jeffrey wants to see the abstruse energy world. Can you let him go there to have a look? Jeffrey, he asked in disbelief. Needless to say, he was stunned. After he entrusted Jeffrey to the regal jade spirit, he didn't care much about him anymore. Now that the Oneness Sky Palace was under attack and in chaos, he didn't plan to release Jeffrey from his inner world. Still, it was a good choice to settle him in the deleting space. Most importantly, Zia had mentioned that anyone who had a powerful ability to decipher Sanskrit words would adapt much easier to the abstruse energy world. Jeffrey could decipher almost all Sanskrit words in a second, so Zen wondered if he could quickly adapt to the abstruse energy world. Sure, tell him that I'll let him out after the human elders return, Zen told the regal jade spirit. Chapter 3287, Go Further. At that moment, King Manard pulled back the ropes that were tied to the side of the cave one by one, then tied up the primeval Lord of Heaven, the snake goddess, and some others with these ropes. Once everything was in place, the primeval Lord of Heaven and the others went straight towards the abstruse energy world. As soon as they arrived at the abstruse energy world, they turned into many light dots and scattered around. Their bodies and their energy souls stepped into the abstruse energy state. Since these human heroes lived as long as Zia Zhang, they shared the same amount of knowledge as him. Right now, however, they were as excited as children as they ran around and kept rubbing their hands. Monkey, can you move out of my way and let me have a look first? Hui, who stood a little behind, asked. The monkey with a furry face turned his head and gave Hui a ferocious stare. In turn, Hui immediately fell silent and didn't press any further. The monkey was one of the strongest among the 39 human heroes and his strength was on par with Fuxi's. Though Hui had a way to restrain Emperor Charm's skill, he was relatively weak in terms of overall strength. After all, the monkey had taught him a hard lesson before. Meanwhile, the snake goddess, the primeval Lord of Heaven and the others wandered around the abstruse energy world for a long time before they reluctantly left. The information in the abstruse energy world is difficult to decipher, the primeval Lord of Heaven said with an unreadable expression after their trip to the abstruse energy world. I saw a mountain, said the snake goddess. It was known that the snake goddess understood Sanskrit words better than the primeval Lord of Heaven. On the other hand, the primeval Lord of Heaven's strength was his analysis and deduction of many things. He wasn't good at deciphering Sanskrit words. Why didn't I see it? Asked Fuxi. I didn't see it either, Emperor Charm agreed as he shook his head. Only the snake goddess could see the mountain among the first group of warriors who entered the abstruse energy world. You are brilliant, snake goddess, Zia Zhang praised. Although there is no concept of distance in the abstruse energy world, the mountain is the easiest to find. I didn't recognize the mountain from the starlight until many years later. I also got the nirvana clay from there. I didn't expect that you'd see the mountain the first time you entered. He enthused. I just saw the shadow of the mountain, the snake goddess said with a smile. That's also very rare, Zia Zhang commented. At that point, the primeval Lord of Heaven untied the rope around his body and gave it to the person behind him. Then, they entered and came out one after another. It turned out that the abstruse energy world was just a small test for them. Those who were good at deciphering Sanskrit words could adapt much faster in the abstruse energy world. After all, they could also accurately describe what they saw and felt. On the contrary, those who found it difficult to understand Sanskrit words couldn't adapt to the abstruse energy world. For instance, Hui returned from the abstruse energy world in a daze, completely unaware of the situation. It took him a long time to recover from his muddled mind. Zia Zhang was a little disappointed at their performance. Back then, these heroes were either on the same level as him or on a higher level when it came to cultivation and talent. He had been in the abstruse energy world for countless years, but he still couldn't find anything meaningful. In the end, he just dived into that mountain and dug out some mud. He believed if any of them could see through the rules of the abstruse energy world, they might be even able to unravel the abstruse energy world's secrets. However, even the most talented snake goddess could only see the shadow of the mountain. That was still far from Zia Yang's expectations. When the last group entered the world, Zen stepped forward and said, Master Zia, there is another person who wants to enter the abstruse energy world. Zia Zhang was very grateful to Zen for bringing his master in person with him. Thus, he kindly asked, who do you want to send to the abstruse energy world? It is my son, Zen answered. A smile graced Zia's face. No problem, you are free to show him something new. Please, go ahead, he said. Zen's son, Jeffrey, was already prepared as he waited in his father's inner world. The regal jade spirit already had an idea after he had seen the abstruse energy world last time. He and number 9527 both agreed that Jeffrey was very suitable to enter the abstruse energy world because he could decipher Sanskrit words very quickly. If only Zen hadn't been very busy after he had returned from the chaotic source world last time, the regal jade spirit would have urged him to go to the deleting space again. Furthermore, Jeffrey also became interested in the abstruse energy world when the regal jade spirit had described it to him. Jeffrey felt a strong gravitational force on him. His body spun, and then he landed in the small cave. Father, Grandpa Primeval, Brother Monkey. The moment he came out, he greeted all the human heroes one by one. What are you calling them? Zen asked with a frown. It was not a big deal to call the primeval Lord of Heaven as Grandpa, but he even called Wukong's son as brother. That was unreasonable and disrespectful. What's wrong? That is what I call them in your inner world, Jeffrey said and shrugged. After this group of outsiders came to his father's inner world, he became quite familiar with them. He could even talk a little to Wukong's son, who was known for being unapproachable. We have lived for so many years. Seniority means nothing for us, the snake goddess said with a faint smile. That's right, ordinary mortals can't live for more than 100 years, so they pay attention to such things. Jeffrey scowled. Should I call you Dad then? Asked Zen. In return, Jeffrey only pursed his lips as he didn't know how to respond. Then, he shifted his attention to the outside of the cave. Is this the abstruse energy world my master has told me about? It's interesting, he exclaimed. His gaze traveled to the floating light dots. Just then, Zia handed the rope to Jeffrey and said, this world is very wonderful. You'll know when you get in. Jeffrey took the rope and after he had tied it to him, he jumped out of the cave. Buzz. He had turned into many light dots and quickly scattered into the distance. Those who entered the abstruse energy world for the first time couldn't locate themselves at all. They didn't know where they were but lost all senses of distance, direction, time, and vision. Everything had changed, and they also couldn't find the cave where they could return to the chaos. Thus, they needed to tie ropes around their bodies. Those light dots. For Zen, those numerous light dots were meaningless. However, Jeffrey had already understood what they meant in a single glance. These light dots are a mountain. It's really interesting. I can land on this mountain. The mountain itself was also made up of light dots, and the snake goddess also saw it clearly the first time she arrived. It was already quite an impressive talent to have, but Jeffrey went further and stood straight on the mountain. After Jeffrey had landed, he looked around again. It seemed that the light dots had a special meaning to each other. Some light dots clumped together and formed a large rock, while some turned into a swamp. Zia Zhang had dug out the nirvana clay from the swamp before. Still, Jeffrey wasn't interested in those things. He wanted to go further. Chapter 3288, Ball. The dots of light that Jeffrey had turned into shuttled through a seemingly chaotic mass of light dots he found himself surrounded by. From one point of view, it seemed as though it was not Jeffrey that moved, but the mountain formed by the light dots moved. But in the abstruse energy world, perception and depth were not as ordinary people understood them. In this world, it was actually Jeffrey who was moving. He soon left the mountain. As he continued moving through, the light dots circled him like water, forming a sort of river as he saw it. It flowed past his body and circles of light dots then appeared in front of him. They now seemed very orderly, as if carefully arranged. He observed this phenomenon for a while and frowned, the dots of light representing his eyebrows drawing closer together. These arranged light dots looked like some sort of three-dimensional plane. He could understand it, and yet he could not describe it because he had never seen or heard of anything like it and thus had nothing to compare it to. This place was not the chaos after all. This plane attracted something deep inside him. He couldn't help but walk towards it, like a moth to a flame. After only a few steps, he felt the rope he was tied to became taut. He shook his body slightly and the rope was untied. At the entrance to the cave, the rope began to shake and the runes on the surface began to flicker. Zia saw the change in the runes and his expression shifted in turn. Zen had worried about sending Jeffrey into the abstruse energy world. He saw the expression on Zia's face and immediately asked, "What's wrong?" "The other end of the rope has loosened," said Zia in a slight panic. "How could this be?" asked Zen. "There are only two possibilities. The first is that Jeffrey was attacked by something on the other side," Zia revealed seriously. "Something on the other side?" Zen asked as his heart sank. Nobody knew what was in the abstruse energy world. It was simply incomprehensible. If monsters of some sort did exist there, what they were and how they behaved and attacked were still left only to the imagination. "Yes," said Zia, "my disciples were attacked when traveling through the mountain. They never returned." Zia was unsure of their condition but he felt it safe to assume they had died. "What is the other possibility?" Zen asked hoping for good news. "Jeffrey untied the rope himself," replied Zia. "But the possibility of that is very low. Those who enter the abstruse energy world have no sense of direction, nor can they distinguish their shapes. It would be impossible to untie the rope." Zia's meaning was quite clear. It was highly probable that something had gone wrong for Jeffrey. Zen's face darkened. He had thought that the abstruse energy world was safe and that something like this could not happen. It could just be an accident. "I'll go and have a look." After tying a rope to himself, Zia jumped up and turned into many dots of light that then spread out. Among them, Zia knew the abstruse energy world the best and was the only one who could save Jeffrey. Buzz. The creatures in the source world had little understanding of the abstruse energy world. Even though Zia had been immersed in this world and researched and figured out many of its rules, he was still easily lost. He barely entered the mountain and was already at his limit. He hoped Jeffrey just accidentally fell into the mountain, and he was confident he could then bring him back. As Zia was searching hard, Jeffrey slowly entered the plane. At first Jeffrey needed to decipher the light dots he saw, just like deciphering Sanskrit words. The first thing he saw was the golden Sanskrit word, and the second was the hidden information within the Sanskrit word. But as he went deeper and deeper in the abstruse energy world, the light dots also began changing in his eyes. Each dot had its own meaning and in combination they revealed a great substance. He could see a piece of lush green grassland with undulating mountains and in the center were a whole bunch of light dots. As for the substance formed by the light dots, Jeffrey failed to understand it. It could have been that there was no corresponding substance in the chaos. There were also stairs formed by light dots. In the center of a whole lot of them, some light dots had gathered together to create a small ball. He was unable to tell what the ball was, but in his subconscious he knew this was what had attracted him here. His heart skipped a beat. He walked up the stairs and reached out to grab the ball of light dots. Zia had cultivated for countless chaotic eras to learn how to retrieve things from the abstruse energy world, and he could still only barely do it. But for Jeffrey, it was a piece of cake. He didn't need to adapt or practice, it was as if he was born here. He grabbed the ball and looked out into the distance. Farther away, there were still light dots scattered chaotically. They moved at such speed that even Jeffrey was unable to distinguish them. But as he continued staring into the distance, he saw an eye emerge from the light dots, staring right back at him. He was not the kind of person who was totally fearless. This eye sent a pang of angst through him. Without hesitation, he grabbed the ball and ran back in the direction he had come, countless light dots dancing and intersecting as he did. He soon found the rope at the edge of the grassland and moved quickly along it, crossing the river and the mountains. Zia searched a long while, but could still not find Jeffrey. He had no choice but to return to the cave. "Have you found my son?" Zen asked with concern when Zia returned. He would never be able to forgive himself if something bad happened to Jeffrey. Besides, he wouldn't know how to face Letitia. Unfortunately, Zia sighed. He was about to speak when he caught a glimpse of the rope beside him. His eyes widened in disbelief as he said, "How is this possible? The rope seems to have recovered to the normal state again." "What do you mean?" Zen asked anxiously. "Your son is still on the other end of the rope." "That's impossible. Did he break free from the rope and tie himself back again?" Zia was at a loss for words when many dots of light began gathering at the entrance of the cave. And the next moment, Jeffrey appeared in the cave. "Ah, it's so hot." Jeffrey entered, still holding the ball in his hand. He felt a scorching pain and instinctively reacted and threw the ball on the ground. Chapter 3289, The Heart of Limit. Click, click, click. They were rooted to the spot as they heard a strange sound echoing inside the narrow cave. Soon after, they saw a ball rolling in circles on the ground. Finally, it stopped when it touched the wall of the cave. The ball's surface was covered all over with bronze hollow patterns. There was a red dot of light inside. Somehow, it looked like it was beating. Plop, plop, plop. They heard a curious sound coming from it. It seemed as though the light dot was beating like an actual heart. It contracted and relaxed with each heartbeat. Zia was absolutely stunned when he saw Jeffrey return all by himself. As his eyes settled upon the ball on the ground, his expression seemed blank. Meanwhile, the expressions of the primeval Lord of Heaven, the Snake Goddess, and the others changed drastically. They were standing on the other side of the cave and were utterly bewildered when they saw the ball. "Is that the Heart of Limit?" the primeval Lord of Heaven asked tentatively. "No, it can't be that Heart of Limit." The Snake Goddess couldn't believe it either. "The element spirit race has already destroyed that one, remember? Where does it come from?" The other beings whispered among each other. They couldn't quite contain their excitement and it showed in their curious faces. The Heart of Limit was another shore token. It was well known that the human race possessed this artifact before. Long ago, the human ancestor bore the Heart of Limit. Afterwards, he used it as his own heart. During that time, the most powerful other shore tokens had been in the possession of the human race. It could even be said that the human race itself was the strongest weapon that existed in the chaos. Even though the human race had failed to complete the finale way, they were actually very close to attaining success. Unfortunately, the tremendous efforts of the human race had attracted the unwanted attention of the element spirit race. Later, both the Heart of Limit and the Overdraft Stone were destroyed. Judging from the reaction of the element spirit race, the primeval Lord of Heaven deduced that the human race had made the right choice, but something was missing. Unfortunately, they didn't find new substitutes after the Heart of Limit and the Overdraft Stone were destroyed. This meant that the once perfect plan of the human race could no longer be fulfilled. No one would be able to complete the finale way. But to everyone's surprise, Jeffrey had successfully brought back a Heart of Limit from outside the chaos. Clearly, they weren't expecting to see it once again. Even Zen expressed his concern as he gazed at the ball. He was completely taken aback by this turn of event as well. Jeffrey couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable being stared at by these powerful warriors. He could feel their truly overwhelming and terrifying auras around him. He felt a bit scared, so he stepped back cautiously. Then, he asked, "Why are you all staring at me like this?" As he said this, the powerful warriors regained their senses. The primeval Lord of Heaven squeezed through the narrow cave and picked up the Heart of Limit. With a serious look, he turned to Jeffrey and asked, "Where did you get this Heart of Limit?" Jeffrey pursed his lips. "Well, I just went to the star, oh wait, I mean the abstruse energy world. Then, I just picked it up there," he answered nonchalantly. "Wait, what? You were able to pick up the things there?" Zia asked him sharply. He turned to Jeffrey with such a piercing look. Jeffrey looked at Zia confusedly. Yes, it's fairly easy for me," he replied. "Did you untie the rope by yourself?" Zia asked, getting more and more bewildered. "Yes," Jeffrey answered simply and shrugged. With that, Zia was rendered utterly speechless. Being able to move freely within the abstruse energy world was an absolutely complicated matter for the creatures in the chaos. Therefore, what Jeffrey did was an incredible feat. The moment people entered the abstruse energy world, it became extremely difficult for them to think straight. Thus, it was much more difficult to move freely. For instance, Zen and the others were unable to distinguish space and time. If it wasn't for their keen observation of the light dots, they wouldn't know. They could not tell their exact position, distance, or even how long they had been staying in the abstruse energy world. Zia instantly regarded the snake goddess as a highly talented being due to her ability to see the mountain from the very first time she entered the abstruse energy world. Being able to enter the mountain, touch it, and even dig out what was inside required countless years of adaptation and repeated practice. Even Zia himself was unable to do this smoothly and without much thought. On the other hand, Zen's son was able to untie the rope right after he went in. He could also pick up a heart of limit without a hitch. Zia felt like he was dreaming because this kind of thing seemed a little unreal. It was truly extraordinary. However, he quickly calmed himself down and gathered his senses. "Jeffrey, where does this heart of limit come from? Did you find it in the mountain?" he asked with unabated curiosity. "Mountain? Huh, there is nothing but a pile of mud in the place of that so-called mountain," Jeffrey said with obvious disdain. "What?" Zia was rendered speechless once more. It took a while before he continued, "Well, did you cross that mountain?" "Yes, I did, and there seems to be a river behind it." Zia, who had already calmed down, interjected loudly once again before Jeffrey could even finish his sentence, "River? You saw a river?" This whole thing sounded really incredulous to Zia. "I did," Jeffrey answered affirmatively. Zia took a deep breath and ran his hand through his forehead. Indeed, there were many light dots flowing behind the mountain. Zia had even made several assumptions about what those light dots were and made a plan to cross them. However, the speed at which the light dots changed was too fast for him. He could neither decipher them nor cross them at all. What he didn't expect was that it was actually a flowing river. It had been extremely difficult for Zia to decipher the light dots. On the other hand, Jeffrey immediately knew what they were with just a single glance. He was certainly remarkable. Seeing that everyone was still staring at him, Jeffrey explained everything to them at one go. "After crossing the river, I realized that the rope was too short. So I untied it and found this on a platform in the depths of the grassland." As he spoke, he gestured at the heart of limit. He actually didn't know what the heart of limit was used for. Nonetheless, he still brought it back by himself. If they wanted to take it, he would agree. As long as they gave him some good things in exchange for it, he had no problem giving it away. Zia had no idea what Jeffrey was thinking. He just smiled at Zen and said, "I didn't expect that you have such a highly talented son. This is astonishing." Zen had anchored his great hope upon his son. After all, he knew that Jeffrey was highly talented in deciphering Sanskrit words. Nevertheless, he hadn't anticipated that Jeffrey would be this outstanding. It was his first time to enter the abstruse energy world. And already, he was able to bring back a heart of limit. It was from Zia that Zen heard about the origin of the heart of limit before. It was a very important other shore token even in stage 33. "Well, my son seems to." Just as Zen was about to praise Jeffrey, a dense stream of radiant starlight suddenly surged towards them from the abstruse energy world outside the cave. Buzz, buzz. With so much starlight pouring in, it meant that something was hurtling towards the cave. As Zia saw the stream of dazzling starlight, his expression suddenly changed. As it poured in from the abstruse energy world, it immediately turned into grayish-brown tentacles and directly swept towards the people inside the cave. "Let's go, now," Zia shouted as he lifted his hand instantaneously. A powerful airflow instantly exploded inside the narrow cave. The airflow pushed everyone backwards and into the deleting space. Whoosh, 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 the grayish-brown tentacles kept on pursuing them and sweeping the area. As those tentacles broke through the cave, they rapidly expanded and extended. Then, they followed the people towards the deleting space. "Take this." Zia stretched out his fingers and made a cut in the air. There were invisible forces that intertwined constantly and pierced the space. It seemed like Zia had summoned an invisible cutter. The invisible cutter continued to slice at the tentacles that were now frenziedly pouring out of the cave into pieces. Chapter 3290, An Invitation. The tentacles quickly transformed after being cut into pieces. Each piece morphed into the shape of a 5-pointed star. A crack then appeared in the center and an eye popped out of it. The pieces now looked like starfish. The starfish searched around for a second before locking onto the primeval Lord of Heaven as their target. Their mission when they had entered the deleting space had been to retrieve the heart of limit that Jeffrey had taken. Whoosh, whoosh, Whoosh! All the starfish swept towards the primeval Lord of Heaven. Seeing them surging towards him didn't scare him in the slightest. He flew upside down, dodging and weaving, leaving mere shadows behind him. Zia's face darkened further on seeing the starfish giving chase. Once more, he extended his arm out and cut through the air. Space cutters appeared one after the other behind the primeval Lord of Heaven. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The starfish passed through thousands of space cutters and were again cut into even smaller pieces. The starfish that were once the size of a fist were now no more than powder. But they remained tenacious and energetic, continuing to charge after the primeval Lord of Heaven even after being turned into powder. They looked like dark brown poisonous smog as they stuck close behind him. Perhaps on realizing that individually they were too small to inflict any real damage, they had evolved toxins within the tiny organisms to make up for their size. The primeval Lord of Heaven circled the deleting pillars and then passed by Zhirong and said flatly, "Burn them." Puff! A scorching flame suddenly ignited, immediately burning the entire poisonous smog following behind the primeval Lord of Heaven, leaving behind only the pungent smell of charred meat. Dealing with such a dilemma as this was a simple task for the primeval Lord of Heaven and the others as they had experienced numerous battles. But the appearance of these monsters in the abstruse energy world put them slightly on edge. "Are there other creatures in the abstruse energy world?" the primeval Lord of Heaven asked. Yes, Zia nodded. He had been here for a long time, and in that time other creatures had attacked this place. The first was a sort of light creature. It didn't have a form, but was simply a special kind of light. It did not attack Zia and the others but reproduced endlessly as soon as they entered the deleting space. Soon the light creatures could be found all across the deleting space, and they proved difficult to get rid of by normal methods. Zia had tried many means before finally succeeding in driving the light creatures away. The second attack involved these tentacles. This was not Zia's first encounter with them. When he had seen the mountain for the first time, he sensed something special inside it. At that time, he knew little of the abstruse energy world, so he was unable to determine what it was. And as soon as he returned to the cave, he was strangled in a tangle of these tentacles. Fortunately, he had reacted quickly and gotten rid of them. If they had pulled him into the abstruse energy world, he might not have been able to fight them off despite his great strength. After that incident, he didn't dare to enter the abstruse energy world for a long time. He never saw the tentacles again when he finally decided to enter the mountain again. It now seemed that those tentacles had moved to the grassland mentioned by Jeffrey, and the heart of limit that Jeffrey had unintentionally taken very likely belonged to them. For them, to enter the chaos rashly was a very risky move, but they took the risk to get the heart of limit back. The abstruse energy world is not lifeless. It may be difficult to comprehend, but it is very lively, Zia deduced. The primeval Lord of Heaven nodded with gratification. Among his 12 disciples, Zia's personality was the most similar to his. He was good at deduction and planning. It seemed destined that Zia had been deleted to this space. "It seems that our hope lies in the abstruse energy world," declared the primeval Lord of Heaven. "But Zia, you explored too slowly. It has been many years and you still cannot even perform as well as a child," the snake goddess retorted mercilessly. Jeffrey and Zen were approaching gingerly when they heard the snake goddess words. "I'm not a child, snake goddess," Jeffrey corrected. The snake goddess smiled faintly. She saw little difference between Zen's and Jeffrey's ages. They were both children to her. "Perhaps I am simply not talented enough," Zia sighed. He looked at Jeffrey again and his eyes flashed with hope. He had been here for so many years and still was not able to even cross a river yet. In contrast, Jeffrey had done it with ease. It seemed that if Jeffrey was given time, he would be able to travel freely in the abstruse energy world. "Jeffrey, you're talented enough to travel freely in the abstruse energy world. Would you care to stay here and help us?" Zia asked hopefully. Jeffrey's eyes flickered. Even if Zia hadn't asked this of him, he would still ask his father for permission to stay. He had been longing to leave his father's inner world, and the first time he stepped into the abstruse energy world, he had felt abnormally satisfied, as if he belonged in the world. It was a feeling he would never forget for as long as he lived. Although he already wanted to stay here, he still could not miss this opportunity to take advantage of the situation. "Yes, I would, but I have conditions." "Oh, what conditions, Jeffrey?" Zia asked smiling. If Jeffrey was willing to stay, he would agree with whatever conditions he had. After thinking a moment, Jeffrey said, "I want a palace of the same size, and..." Jeffrey's request was not excessive or difficult to fulfill by using the resources in the deleting space. "I can grant you all you wish," Zia said without hesitation. Worry appeared on Zen's face, who had been silent the entire time until he asked, although he can travel freely in the abstruse energy world, is it not dangerous for him? The monsters in the abstruse energy world might even break into the deleting space. If Jeffrey encountered them in the abstruse energy world, the consequences would be unimaginable. Dad, Jeffrey's eyebrows shot up like sharp swords. Leaving Zen's inner world was not easy for him. How could he be willing to return there? Seeing Jeffrey's determination reminded Zen of himself. He realized it might not be that easy to get his son to compromise. Zen sighed and said, "Your decision is fine with me, but as for your mother, just don't tell her. Isn't the deleting space very safe?" Jeffrey asked in a hurry, trying to convince his father. "I'll do my best to keep him safe. He's truly very important," Zia said enthusiastically, standing by their side. Zia still had many questions and theories about the abstruse energy world. He even had a theory that there could be another cave just like theirs in another world too. Or, was there another civilization in the abstruse energy world, made up of another kind of light dots? Zia was unable to solve and perfect these questions and theories, but now he could rely on Jeffrey for help. Chapter 3291, Birth of the Evil. Silence hung in the air as the primeval Lord of Heaven, the snake goddess, Fuxi, and the others stared at Zen and waited for his decision. There were many reasons Jeffrey should stay and help Zia, such as to help the human race and for the finale way. However, Jeffrey was still Zen's son, and it was normal for a father to worry about his son's safety. Finally, Zen came to a decision. "I will tell your mother that you are here to learn martial arts," he said. When Jeffrey heard those words, excitement quickly replaced his previously upset expression. Zen shook his head at the instant change in his son's attitude, but he still reminded him, "Although I allow you to enter the abstruse energy world, you have to know that this is not my inner world. Only you can save yourself once you are in danger." It wasn't a problem for Jeffrey to turn the world upside down within his inner world, but of course, the real world was much harsher. "I know," Jeffrey said affectionately. He was touched as he felt his father's deep love for him. But he was no longer young, and he had the burden of living under his father's glory before. It was time for him to march alone. He had grown up listening to all the legends of Zen back when he was in the Cloud Hall. Later on, he went to the Divine Land and met many powerful warriors like Augustus, Joy and the others, but his father seemed to be far too stronger than them. Then, he arrived at the Source World and was kept in his father's inner world for quite some time. During that time, it seemed that his father only contacted him when he needed to decipher Sanskrit words. It looked like Zen forgot about him most of the time. Still, he understood that his father had been very busy and hadn't stopped a bit for over 100 years. But the busier he was, the more Jeffrey wanted to prove that he was very useful. It was probably impossible to catch up with his father in terms of cultivation, but traveling in the abstruse energy world was his strong point. Besides, these great warriors who seemed to be mightier than his father all placed great importance on the abstruse energy world. Most importantly, he also liked the feeling of staying in the abstruse energy world. He wanted to continue exploring that world. A while later, Zia invited Zen, the primeval Lord of Heaven, and the others to move within the palace. He had already shown the abstruse energy world to everyone, but aside from that, he also needed to consult the primeval Lord of Heaven on how to transform the deleting space. In the last countless years, he worked hard alone in this space. Now that more people with ideas came along, he truly felt less pressured. After more than half a day in the palace, they suddenly heard a violent roar that came from somewhere in the deleting space. At the same time, a bright blue flash of light appeared. Everyone was confused when they heard the strange sound. They all turned to Zia, as if to ask him about what happened. In turn, Zia looked to the north of the deleting space and said, "It started again. Recently, that chaos ancient god seems to be very active." He gently waved his hand as he spoke. The space above him turned into a mirror-like object and projected the current scene in the north. In the north was a floating blob of red lava. Bubbles constantly appeared on its surface and emitted a scorching hot energy. How could Othniel delete such a large space? Zen asked as his eyes widened in awe. "It has been like this recently," Zia nodded. "Is there any fierce battle going on in the source world?" he asked. Zen shook his head in confusion. Although the source world was not peaceful currently, the chaos ancient gods weren't involved in the battles. He didn't know why Othniel kept deleting spaces. Meanwhile, something began to brew in the Dust Blood province. A bright beam of light burst out and illuminated the area. Flames combusted from the minimum space and spread at an alarmingly fast rate. It wasn't long before the whole Dust Blood province was covered in flames. There was no emotion on Divine Farmer's face as he watched the flames spread. Then, he turned around and left. The flames would kill most of the creatures in the Dust Blood province, but Divine Farmer was already numb to such a slaughter. After all, he had witnessed so much. A few moments later, he showed up in another province. With a flick of his finger, a dot of fire bloomed once again. Trillions of creatures in every province he set fire on perished. There had been countless fights and disputes in the Source World ever since its birth. Needless to say, the number of creatures that died in several past major battles was no less than horrifying. Among the many battles that broke out by the end of the Middle Ages, the melee between several races was the most tragic. Almost all the races had been involved in that war, leading to extremely large casualties. Usman was born after the melee among the various races. He was transformed from the negative emotions of the Source World and quickly rose in a short period of time. When he was at his peak, he had even surpassed the captain of the Black Ship and became someone who all forces feared. Later on, as Usman defected, the captain of the Black Ship had no choice but to join hands with other super forces to kill him. Many years passed since Usman had died, but those who had gone through that battle knew his strength like the back of their hands. He was a fiend who lurked in the Source World. He was everywhere, waiting for someone to wake him up. If the Bearing race and the Divine Farmer race wanted to start a war that would affect the entire Source World, they might also wake that fiend up. And to set fire on provinces with the flames from the minimum spaces was undoubtedly the most economical method. 5 minutes later, Divine Farmer appeared in the White Seal province. Just as he was about to take out the minimum space, a giant eagle shadow appeared in front of him. It was from the Gale Eagle race in the White Seal province. The Gale Eagle race wasn't very famous in the Source World, but they had a quite strong leader. Although he didn't become an eternal warrior at the Eternal Realm, he had been in stage 32 for a long time. Back then, the leader of the Gale Eagle race had once helped the Divine Farmer race on the other shore. Why did you set fire everywhere and burn down trillions of innocent creatures? The Gale Eagle asked. Mission, Divine Farmer answered briefly. Can you let go of the White Seal province? The Gale Eagle asked again. No, said Divine Farmer, a hint of pity in his eyes. But you can lead the Gale Eagle race to leave, he added. The Gale Eagle was clearly disappointed. He shouted, the White Seal province is the ancestral home of our race, so how can we easily give it up? You'll burn it over my dead body. Since Divine Farmer was an eternal warrior, he was far stronger than the Gale Eagle. The Gale Eagle naturally knew that resistance was futile and he would be like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Thus, he was ready to die. You once helped us before. Please don't make things difficult for me, said Divine Farmer. However, the Gale Eagle turned a deaf ear to his plea. At that moment, another shore token spun above his head. Then, he spread his wings and attacked Divine Farmer. A few minutes later, the eagle with broken wings fell from the sky and plunged into the ground. Along with him was the minimum space with a dot of flame. Soon enough, the provinces burned to ashes one by one. Restlessness and misery hung like a thick blanket throughout the Source World. When there was a slight conflict between creatures and races, they would pull out their weapons and attack each other. It happened so much that there were endless conflicts amongst races. Not long after, the negativity in the Source World escalated to the extreme, then suddenly vanished without a trace. While all of those happened, a new creature was born in one corner of the Source World. This creature emitted an intense aura of evilness. Chapter 3292, The Reborn Usman. This evil creature was born in a human tribe in the Jade Law province. The Jade Law province used to belong to the Nine Li race, but after the race was destroyed, it fell under the control of the Bearing race. 90% of the province's population was comprised of humans. Shortly after their occupation of the Jade Law province, the Bearing race conducted a ruthless purge within the province. Those who remained loyal to the Nine Li race were exterminated and any news about the Nine Li race was completely blocked and prohibited. In time, any trace of the Nine Li race was thoroughly erased and the people of the Jade Law province completely shifted their loyalties to the Bearing race. Of course, the shifting of loyalties came after the realization that they had no choice but to accept the Bearing race as their new leaders. The past few days were literal hell as the temperature in the entire Jade Law province constantly soared. The scorching sun seemed determined to evaporate every last drop of water in the land and the air was thick with heat and irritation over the entire province. Somewhere within Peace City was the City Lord's mansion and in it, a baby was born. This was a moment of great joy for City Lord Paxton Joe, but the moment his child was birthed, he heard a shrill scream. Concerned about the safety of his wife and child, he hurriedly rushed into the delivery room. He was not prepared for the sight that awaited him. His wife lay dead in a pool of blood while several midwives were horrifyingly beheaded. On the floor was a naked baby. The appearance of his child stunned him. Judging from the baby's initial appearance, it was undoubtedly human. However, the two short horns on his head made him look like a fiend. This fiendish baby giggled and waved his little, bloody hand towards Paxton Joe as if to proudly tell him that yes, he was the one who killed all these people. Paxton Joe felt a shiver run down his back at the sight of his supposed son's evil smile. He shook his head in denial and tried to make sense of it all. "This is impossible," he murmured under his breath. "My son wouldn't do this. You are not my son." He was an outstanding warrior in the Jade Law province. At the young age of over 30, he was able to reach the other shore realm and become the city lord of Peace City, which was a very extraordinary feat. How could this terrible devastation happen to his wife and child? As soon as he came to his senses, Paxton Joe immediately unsheathed his saber. This was not his son, but a monster from hell. Thus, killing this devil child was justified. Whoosh! A wild saber intent was released, ready to hack away at the baby's head. The power contained within this strike was over 100 divine megatons, enough to defeat a considerably powerful enemy. Not many people in the entire Jade Law province could resist an attack from Paxton Joe, and this newborn was no exception. Or so he thought. As the saber shadow approached him, the baby smiled. There was no trace of fear in his face as he stretched out his chubby hand towards the oncoming attack. Crack! Instead of being beheaded, the baby grabbed the saber and halted his father's attack. To say Paxton Joe was shocked would be an understatement. Even if this child was truly a fiend, he was only a newborn. How in the world was he able to resist such a powerful attack? Creak! A strong force emanated from the baby as he actually bent the huge saber with his small hand. A great sense of crisis immediately overwhelmed Paxton Joe. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew that if he let this baby live, it could spell chaos and destruction for the entire source world. He immediately let go of his saber and rushed towards the baby instead. There was only one way to go about this, and that was to end this fiend's life. If he couldn't use his saber, then Paxton Joe would rely on his fists. Normally, a person would be averse to punching an actual baby. His smooth and milky skin would no doubt deter any malicious thought upon him, but the aura he emanated was so malicious that Paxton Joe had no problems not holding back his attack. Just as his fist was about a few inches away, an innocent smile broke through the baby's face, and Paxton Joe felt his mind bombarded by sharp, unbearable pain. There was a scream moments before blood spurted out of his orifices and his head exploded. With his enemy dead, the baby let out a victorious smile and slowly began to crawl out of the delivery room. Paxton Joe's scream attracted the guards' attention, and all of them rushed towards the delivery room. Upon arrival, they saw the baby crawling his way out of the bloody chamber, much to their confusion. As they stared at the baby, he looked up and gave them a mysterious smile. Puff 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 puff. There was no time for them to run as their heads suddenly exploded and filled the mansion with even more bloodshed. Their deaths attracted even more guards along with a few famous masters at the other shore realm. Of course, the result remained the same. Any person who caught sight of the baby met only one end, with their heads exploded. All 1,011 people that resided in the mansion died that day. But the baby was not done with his bloodshed. As he ventured out onto the gates, he crossed paths with various people. All of them shot him strange, panicked looks, and why wouldn't they? He was an infant completely covered in blood with eyes that glowed strangely. Puff 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 puff. One smile, and that was all it took for all of them to die. A day passed and the originally bustling Peace City became eerily quiet with nothing but dead bodies. The seemingly innocent baby was now on his way out of the city gates. However, just as he was about to cross the threshold, a thin figure appeared in front of him. It was Yellow Thirk. He instinctively resisted this figure, and a cautious look plastered all over his face. He suddenly knitted his tiny brows and launched an explosive attack towards Yellow Thirk's head. Bang! There was a loud sound as Yellow Thirk took the blow, but, unlike all the previous victims, his head remained whole and his expression remained unchanged. A trace of anger appeared on the baby's face as he continued his barrage of attacks in an effort to blow up Yellow Thirk's head. Bang! 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 For some reason, no matter how hard the baby tried, Yellow Thirk remained unyielding, nor did he make any effort to fight back. In fact, there was a trace of tenderness in his eyes when he looked at the small infant. To the baby's horror, Yellow Thirk bent down and picked him up in his arms. What could have been seen as a gentle act was actually anything but. Yellow Thirk's hold contained an irresistible force. The baby was effectively restrained by the powerful being. "What's your name?" Yellow Thirk asked. Nobody in their right mind would ask a baby a question and expect an answer, but then again this was no ordinary baby. Not only did Yellow Thirk expect an answer from him, but his tone also held a trace of authority that allowed no retorts. There was a momentary trace of hesitation on the baby's face, but Yellow Thirk insisted. "Tell me." Realizing that there was no dodging the powerful being's query, the baby babbled for a few seconds before answering. "My name is Usman." The corners of Yellow Thirk's mouth curled up in a smile. Very good. He was not surprised to hear that. The Usman that previously existed belonged to the Black Ship and was killed in the hands of Yellow Thirk and a few other people. However, someone like Usman, who was the incarnation of all negative emotions of the source world, could not really die. So long as resentment and hate remained and accumulated to a certain level, he would be reborn infinitely. "From now on, you will be the boy of our bearing race," Yellow Thirk declared. As he said that, he tightened his grip onto the baby and walked into the void, leaving behind a dead city with headless corpses. Chapter 3293, Soul City. After he finally understood the entire story, the primeval Lord of Heaven didn't order Zia any further. What occurred in the deleting space was beyond what he'd imagined. He needed time to absorb what he'd seen, and at the same time, had to hand over the exploration of the abstruse energy world to Zia and Jeffrey. After all, energy souls couldn't give much help. As for the Heart of Limit, Zen tried to carry it. Since the Heart of Limit was taken to the deleting space from the abstruse energy world, he tried to use the truth of 3 energy construction to carry it but failed. No matter how hard they analyzed, neither Zen nor Zia could seem to understand the reason it didn't work. But because Zen was the first person to carry the other shore token in the deleting space, the problem could be in the truth of 3 energy construction, deleting space, or the Heart of Limit itself. Still, they couldn't pinpoint the right one. Zia looked very disappointed. He wanted so bad to see the deleting space as another other shore. But Zen wasn't bothered by it. With his current abilities, he still could not bring the 3 civilization artifacts to their limits. Even if he truly carried the Heart of Limit, there would be no guarantee that it would help him. At this point, his top priority was to achieve a higher level on the other shore. Nothing else mattered except this. A few days later, Zen left the deleting space. And since Zen left, so did the energy souls. Meanwhile, the bodies Zia had created for the primeval Lord of Heaven and the others remained like statues in the palace. Jeffrey, on the other hand, remained in the deleting space. He was not alone, he had the Holy Maiden of the Flower Dancing Sect as company. Zen's promise to Jeffrey was finally fulfilled now. Even so, Zen was still uneasy with this action. He mentioned to Letitia that Jeffrey had been chosen by a human master and accepted as a disciple. This meant that he was to be secluded and isolated for a long stretch of time. If Letitia found out that Zen lied to her, would she still treat him as intimately as usual? Weeks went by and the Oneness Sky Palace was gradually restored to its original state. The once damaged Dragon City had been rebuilt, while the Phoenix Palace had been moved elsewhere. Because the Bering race broke through the Dragon Cliff, the southeast of the Bloom Divine Province grew restless. It was for this reason that Gorin replaced the dead Patton in order to guard the cliff and protect the province. All the creatures in the Bloom Divine Province were jittery and anxious. It came to a point that a handful of powerful masters even chose to move their families all the way to the Pear Hill. This was a smart move. No matter what had happened, the Pear Hill proved to be much stronger than the Oneness Sky Palace. Whoever wanted to attack the Pear Hill, might it be the Bering race or the Divine Farmer race, would have to think hard before taking a move. The leaders of the Oneness Sky Palace did not stop anyone from moving if they wanted to. In essence, a good bird perches only on a fine tree. In the same suit, humans of Bloom Divine Province could move if they found it more suitable. Even Pierce and Auden wanted to move all the senior leaders of the Oneness Sky Palace to the Pear Hill, just so they could avoid any more disasters. As long as Yasmin and Eastern Emperor Tai woke up, they could return to the Bloom Divine Province safe and sound. This was the most rational choice. But if all the masters of the Oneness Sky Palace fled from the Bloom Divine Province, it would only lead to the collapse of the palace. Hence, they didn't dare to make such a decision for Eastern Emperor Tai as he had spent a long time building the palace. After a hasty, passionate discussion, Pierce, Auden, Athamar, and Winchell chose to stay in the Bloom Divine Province. Once they came to an agreement, Pierce replaced Eastern Emperor Tai and issued an imperial edict to the Bloom Divine Province. Through the edict, the war between the humans and the Sun Crow race was made public. Also written in the edit, he informed that the Pear Hill would provide assistance if necessary, to calm down the panic in the Bloom Divine Province. Still, Zen didn't care too much regarding these matters. Even though he had been in the Oneness Sky Palace for a long time, it was not meant for him forever. After knowing Elvenia had burned the truth enlightenment when she thought she was doomed, he wrote down another one for her. After Pierce obtained the truth enlightenment, he was very surprised. There was no point in hiding it anymore now. All he wanted to do was to help the palace with it. However, if everyone in the Oneness Sky Palace knew the truth enlightenment, it wouldn't be long until everyone started using it for their own personal interests. Many people from the Bearing race, Divine Farmer race, and other super forces could also learn it, especially because they also cultivated the truth of eternal sword intent. It was for this reason that Pierce made a rule. Every person who read the truth enlightenment could only share it with one person they trusted. Also, they needed to swear an oath so that the truth enlightenment could not be leaked. Meanwhile, in stage 17 of the other shore, the figures of Zen and Elvenia reappeared. They had cleared their goals just after the fierce battle with the Sun Crow race had finished. In order to enter stage 33, they would have to enter the Soul City and go through the Land of Bone Tribulation first. With their indigo souls at the ultimate level, it would be no problem for them to enter stage 29 to get to Soul City. There happened to be temples in stage 17, but none that interested them. Once they'd passed through the White Star Ring, Zen and Elvenia transformed into two rays of white light and made their way upwards. Then, they arrived at stage 18, which was a translucent ice field. Here, ancient secrets were sealed within the thick ice. Historically, many ruling civilizations had made this stage their habitat. However, they ended up disappearing into history, some were eliminated, and some were forced to hide. The two walked a long distance along the ice field before they came into contact with the star ring leading to stage 19. Here, they stepped onto the star ring and were sent up into the air once again. Once they arrived in stage 19, they stepped out of the star ring and a whistling wind swept through them. In stage 19, the hurricanes never ceased. As they scanned the area, they could only see boundless yellow sand. Fortunately, the star ring leading to stage 20 was not too far away. Elvenia led the way, and they found the star ring in less than 5 minutes. Near the star ring, some human souls of light sized up them. Their origins were unknown, but they seemed to be powerful. Not long after though, the souls of light retreated from the other shore after whispering among each other. Just as Zen and Elvenia were about to step into the star ring and enter stage 20, Zen paused. He recalled that not long after he entered the source world, he obtained another shore key from the tomb of the Sword Light Palace's leader. That other shore key could open up a temple in stage 19. But now, such a temple was no longer attractive to Zen. He wanted to give that other shore token to Hayam and his companions for exploration. After a few moments, he continued and stepped into the star ring alongside Elvenia. They passed stage 20, stage 21, and stage 22. And as they passed each stage, they saw every scene change drastically. If it were any other person, they would have stopped in each stage just to explore. However, Zen and Elvenia had one goal only. They moved up stages quickly, each and every time they found the star ring. It didn't take long until they arrived in stage 28, the Eternal Prohibition stage. The upper stage of it was the Constant Glory stage, where the Soul City was located. Their journey was about to finish. However, they met some challenges in no time. Chapter 3294, Another Way. Generally speaking, the forces in different stages of the other shore had different structures. For instance, the ruling civilizations were considered as the supreme forces in some stages, just like the Abyss spirit race that dominated stage 11 of the other shore. In some stages, the native races on the other shore became the rulers. At the very beginning, the Element spirit race had tried to rule the other shore. They also had a plan about the stage rulers, especially since the Dark Region had appeared. They wanted to occupy all the 19 stages of the Desire World and make sure that they would control the ruler in each stage. It was a good plan. During their peak, nearly 13 of the 19 stage rulers belonged to the Element Spirit race. However, what the Element Spirit race did was an offense to everyone else. By the time the Dark Region had appeared, the other shore was already a very perfect world. Many of the ruling civilizations that escaped from the chaos were not easy to deal with. The high pressure on the Element Spirit race was what eventually broke them. At the same time, there were other races such as the Nihility race that attacked them. Now, only 6 stage rulers were completely under the Element Spirit race's control. Stage 28 of the other shore, the Eternal Prohibition stage, was under the control of the Element Spirit race. However, the higher the stage was, the more the larger races would restrain themselves. Although the stage ruler of the Eternal Prohibition stage was from the element spirit race, in the past few years, the element spirit race had rarely interfered in the travel of other races on the other shore. After many races had resisted in their last attempt, the element spirit race realized that they could only control the other shore if they did it step by step. Hindering the development of the other ruling civilizations or completely destroying them would have adverse effects. Such a strategy conceptualized after reflection was effective. Under the continuous influence of the element spirit race, many races and ruling civilizations on the other shore were willing to or were forced to join them. Now, there were very few races that could oppose the element spirit race. Recently, there had been some changes in the Eternal Prohibition stage. More and more Moonfire slaves descended from stage 32 of the other shore. As the strongest fighters of the element spirit race, the Moonfire slaves were undoubtedly a powerful force. Therefore the races of the other shore that lived in stage 28 felt uneasy at their presence. Numerous mountains were everywhere in the Eternal Prohibition stage. They were so many that if one looked down at them from the sky, they looked like a herd of elephants looking for food. In the center of the mountains was a huge basin, where the only structure was the big city in the Eternal Prohibition stage, the Forbidden Rain City. Meanwhile, Zen, who carried Elvenia on his back, floated high up in the sky and observed the Forbidden Rain City. The dark region in stage 28 of the other shore is so small, he commented. In the center of the large city was only a beam of black light. The dark region looked particularly weak in stage 28 of the other shore. Perhaps it's because stage 28 is not important. This beam of black light must be a passageway to the dark region, Elvenia deduced. Recently, Elvenia became very rational and had a detailed understanding of the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation. Back then, she didn't want to face her past. Now, she realized that she belonged to the Oneness Sky Palace and was a real human being. Even if she couldn't save her father, she could still do something for the Oneness Sky Palace. She couldn't just be an incompetent member of royalty who couldn't do anything but watch the Oneness Sky Palace decline. The star ring within stage 28 of the other shore should be in the northwest, she said. We can get to the Soul City after we've passed through the star ring, Zen said with a smile. At that moment, the two of them climbed up the stages of the other shore at a great speed. Suddenly, Elvenia became more cautious. The entire stage 28 is under the control of the element spirit race. If we want to pass through it, we must be careful. Thus Master Pierce has sent someone to pick us up at the gate of the Forbidden Rain City, she said. It was known that Zen had caught the attention of the element spirit race several times. After all, he had killed the stage ruler in stage 14 of the other shore and opened the creation myth temple in stage 17. If the members of the element spirit race weren't fools, of course they would stop Zen from entering the star ring. Whoosh, whoosh, they crossed countless mountains, and finally arrived at the edge of the Forbidden Rain City. Perhaps because the element spirit race had controlled the entire stage 28 of the other shore, the Forbidden Rain City didn't guard against the creatures that came in and out of the city. There weren't even any guards who watched over the city gate. But for some reason, Zen and Elvenia caught the attention of the creatures from the other shore the moment they arrived. At that point, Zen became vigilant. He didn't believe that their attention was out of kind concern. A human soul of light stood by the side of the city gate, and quietly approached Zen and Elvenia when they showed up. Then, he lowered his voice and said, "Are you Princess Elvenia?" "Yes," Elvenia answered. "I'm Doyle Joe. Let's talk outside the city," said Doyle Joe. He was a member on the third floor of the Land of Sword Grief. Zen had seen him twice before, but they had never talked to each other. When Zen and Elvenia saw the mysterious look on Doyle's face, they also lowered their heads and followed him out of the city gate. After they found a secluded place, Doyle Joe said, "Elder Pierce asked me to lead you to the Constant Glory stage. I have been observing in the Forbidden Rain City these days. How is everything going in the city?" Elvenia asked. "Quite a few Moonfire slaves recently came here. There weren't a lot of them here before, until now. They might come over to take action against the two of you," Doyle Joe answered. Upon hearing those words, Zen and Elvenia frowned at the same time. They had already witnessed how strong the Moonfire slaves were, but at that time, the stage 17 of the other shore had greatly restrained the power of the Moonfire slaves. Now that they were in stage 28, they could demonstrate far greater power. "Are they only targeting us? How about the other souls of light from the Oneness Sky Palace?" Zen asked curiously. "No," Doyle Joe said and shook his head. He looked at Elvenia and continued, "Both of you came here with your physical bodies, and your face is clear, Princess Elvenia. You can't pass through the star ring openly without alerting the Moonfire slaves. Then what should we do? Elvinia asked as her beautiful eyes narrowed into slits. Zen also lowered his head in silence. If the star ring was really heavily guarded, there would be no other decent way except for breaking into the star ring as he did in stage 11 of the other shore. But this time, there are creatures from other races that are willing to help, Doyle Joe said out of the blue. Who are willing to help? Elvinia asked curiously. The ear mouse race, replied Doyle Joe with a smile. Elder Pierce has spent a lot of soul pills on the cooperation with the ear mouse race. You can go to the star ring through the underground passageway outside the Forbidden Rain City, he explained. The mouse races on the other shore were always considered as strong and formidable beings, and most of them had a good relationship with the ear mouse race. Yet, Elvinia just rolled her eyes at Doyle Joe's answer. Since he was already prepared, he could just come straight to the point. Why did he have to beat around the bush now? It was true that he came all the way from stage 29 to meet with Elvinia, so she didn't say much. There was only a slight hint of dissatisfaction in her voice as she said, "Then please lead the way." After that, Zen and Elvinia, under Doyle Joe's lead, traveled to the front of the mountain nearest to the Forbidden Rain City. On one side of the mountain was a naturally formed cave. Several huge mice guarded the cave's entrance. Chapter 3295, A Trap. These mice were gigantic. Their faces looked ferocious, and their bean-sized eyes were fixated on them. Upon seeing the unfriendly gazes of these giant mice, Zen said, "Doyle, I don't think the ear mouse race is here." The ear mouse race had entered the other shore in the form of souls of light, and Zen had been on good terms with them. Now that he couldn't see any ear mouse here, Zen felt something was amiss. Most souls of light don't stay in stage 28 of the other shore. The ear mouse race will also choose to stay in the constant glory stage to pass the test of the soul city. If it weren't for you and Princess Elvinia, I wouldn't have come either, answered Doyle. But these giant mice, Zen said hesitantly. Don't worry, Zen, these are members of the Twilight Mouse race. They take orders from the ear mouse race, so there is no problem, said Doyle, who then took the lead and entered the cave ahead of Zen and Elvinia. Elvinia glanced at Zen and smiled faintly. Don't be suspicious. Let's go in too, she said. Zen stood still on the spot for a moment. It was as if he was communicating with someone. Before long, the deep creases in his brows smoothened, and he raised his legs and strode forward to catch up with Elvinia. His steps were now firm. Mice were good at digging holes underground. The Twilight Mouse race had been living in stage 28 of the other shore for several chaotic eras. The underground world of stage 28 of the other shore was even more complicated than the Forbidden Rain City, but the Twilight Mouse race had obviously become the hegemony here. After the three of them entered the cave, a Twilight Mouse reached out and gently pressed the wall of the cave. Boom, boom, boom. With a series of reverberating booming noises, a huge rock rolled down at a slow speed and fell right at the entrance, sealing the entrance tightly. The moment the entrance of the cave was sealed, the inside of the cave immediately darkened. Crack. As soon as the cave fell into darkness, several dots of flames appeared at their sights. Several Twilight Mice were holding torches in their hands, illuminating the surroundings with ease. Princess Elvinia, Zen, please, said Doyle, stretching out his hand and making a please gesture towards the cave. The cave near the surface of the mountain was very spacious. The Twilight Mouse race seemed to have even leveled the ground inside the cave, because the road ahead looked quite flat. After about dozens of miles, however, the cave became increasingly narrow. In some places, only one person could pass at one time. Although the bodies of the Twilight Mice were huge, it didn't affect their agility. They could pass these narrow areas in a flash, while Zen and Elvinia had to spend more time doing the same. Half a day later, they had traveled more than 100 miles underground. After walking in the narrow cave for so long, Elvinia finally asked impatiently, "Why haven't we arrived at the destination, Doyle?" "Princess Elvinia, the Forbidden Rain City is very large. We have to cross more than half of the city to go to the northwest corner, so it will take some time," replied Doyle. "Squeak. Don't worry, we'll arrive soon. Why are you this anxious?" one member of the Twilight Mouse race said coldly. Doyle turned around and gave the Twilight Mouse a fierce glare. The Twilight Mouse lowered its head and fell silent. Elvinia blinked her eyes and looked at Zen quietly. No matter how obtuse she was, she could sense that something was wrong at this moment. Zen secretly winked at her, signaling her to keep silent. Doyle was a member of the Oneness Sky Palace. If he betrayed the Oneness Sky Palace, he definitely wouldn't be able to leave alive, so he wouldn't do such a thing. Therefore, there were only two possibilities. One was that the Doyle in front of Zen and Elvinia was a fake, and the other was that Doyle's soul of light was controlled by someone else. As for these twilight mice, they most likely had nothing to do with the ear mouse race. Primeval Lord of Heaven, now, I'm afraid there's really something wrong with this, Zen said in his mind. In fact, he had already felt that something was amiss when they were outside the Forbidden Rain City. At that time, he had wanted to remind Elvinia and refuse Doyle's request, but the Primeval Lord of Heaven told Zen in his mind that he shouldn't take any action right away. Now that they had spent such a long time traveling underground, they were most likely heading to trouble, so Zen naturally hoped that the Primeval Lord of Heaven would show up and solve the problem. Don't worry, the Primeval Lord of Heaven said calmly. It's only stage 28 of the other shore. I can handle it. In the Creation Myth Temple, the Primeval Lord of Heaven had only used one finger to kill those Moonfire slaves. At that time, the strength of the Moonfire slaves was indeed suppressed, but so was the Primeval Lord of Heaven's. As long as he didn't encounter any genuinely powerful warrior of the element spirit race, he still had some ways to cope. Don't listen to the nonsense of these mice. After all, they are just animals. Haha, Doyle explained and then continued to lead the way. After passing through those narrow parts, the road ahead gradually became wide again. Soon afterward, the three of them and the twilight mice arrived at a circular cave. The walls of the cave had been carefully carved. Instead of a cave, the place where they were now looked more like a magnificent palace. As soon as Zen and Elvinia entered the cave, Doyle said, "We are under the star rings. We can enter our star ring after we go up?" asked Elvinia. "Yes, you're right," Doyle said, nodding his head. "But it's a pity that you won't have the chance to go up alive." Dong dong dong. There were 6 passages around the circular cave. The sounds of heavy footsteps echoed from those passages, and green light also spread from inside them. Very soon, Moonfire slaves with green flames burning on their bodies flooded out of the passages. Elvinia took a step back and leaned against Zen. She frowned and glared at Doyle. "Doyle, what do you mean by this?" With a smirk, Doyle said, "Nothing serious. Someone wants to take your lives, and I just brought you here as required." As soon as he finished speaking, those Moonfire slaves entered the cave. The temperature in the whole cave continued to rise. "Are you really Doyle?" Zen asked. Zen's calmness made Doyle somewhat flustered and even a little apprehensive. In an impatient tone, he said, "Whether I'm Doyle or not, what does it have to do with you? I'm just curious." Doyle's still a member of the Oneness Sky Palace. If he betrays the Oneness Sky Palace, he won't be able to survive. "This being the case, you're most likely not Doyle," Zen said in a flat tone. "Haha, I'm not him, so." The shape of Doyle's soul of light gradually changed, and his voice also turned sharper. Although his face couldn't be seen clearly, it was obvious that he had changed into another person. As it turned out, someone else's soul of light had been disguising as Doyle. "If you're Doyle, I can show you some mercy. But since you're not, you're doomed to death," Zen replied indifferently. "Really? Haha, then you'd better see if you can survive first." The man took a step back while pointing at Zen and Elvinia. The Moonfire slaves, who had been approaching them slowly, now rushed over from different directions. "Zen, we have no other choice but to fight," Elvinia squinted and said. Just as she was about to rush towards one of the passages, Zen stretched his hand, grabbed her wrist, and pulled it gently. At the same time, a shadow appeared on his forehead. Chapter 3296, The Power of Finger Light. The shadow which had appeared was the Primeval Lord of Heaven himself. Even in the Eternal Scroll painting, his ranking was quite high. In the past, it was he who led the human race to fight against the element spirit race face to face. Furthermore, he himself had killed many Moonfire slaves throughout his time. Although his real body was trapped and only his energy soul was left, it was not a problem for him to use the power left in the Creation Myth Temple to help Zen resist the Moonfire slaves. Whoosh! Vibrations could be felt in the air as the battle started. "Take this." A finger light drew an arc and shot towards the Moonfire slave in the front. The Moonfire slave collapsed to the ground with a loud thump, which was almost impossible to hear amidst the surrounding din. Clap! The finger light's force left thunder-like sounds. The power of the finger light could be considered extremely strong in stage 17. It was also at the top in stage 28, but it was no longer as terrifying as it was in stage 17. However, the Primeval Lord of Heaven had experienced many battles. His experience harnessed not only his instincts, but also his skills. The finger light that pierced through the armor of the Moonfire slaves accurately pierced into the flames and through their spiritual cores. Crack, crack, crack. The 9 Moonfire slaves that surrounded them from all directions froze in place. After a few seconds, the flames that were emitted from the armor gradually shrank, disappeared, and extinguished. The moon fire slaves were a kind of fire spirits, and the flames were their forms. Since their spiritual cores were broken and their flame bodies disappeared, the powerful armor on their bodies collapsed and fell to the ground. The soul of light and the several twilight mice that had deceived Zen into coming in were all stunned. Their eyes were in a sort of daze and confusion was evident on their faces. What had just happened was indeed unexpected, for they really looked up to the Moonfire slaves. In fact, in their eyes, the Moonfire slaves were invincible. No one in Stage 28 could resist them. Even the ruler of Stage 28 couldn't resist the joint attack of several Moonfire slaves. It should have been a piece of cake for the 9 Moonfire slaves to kill 2 human beings, who had mere physical bodies, in a confined space. But in a flash, the 9 Moonfire slaves were killed. Their shock was unmatched. Amongst the crowd were gasps, dropped jaws, and pale faces. "Kill them, kill them," the soul of light ordered desperately, once he realized what had just happened. He had a high status, but after all, he was just a soul of light. It was impossible for him to fight against Elvinia and Zen. Following the man's order, those twilight mice all determinedly rushed towards Zen and Elvinia. Zen's eyes narrowed slightly, he lowered his body and jumped high towards the sky. His feet landed directly on the top of the head of the twilight mouse positioned in front. Boom! The twilight mouse's head was directly crushed. Zen didn't stop. With a crisp crack of lightning, his fist had already smashed into the head of another twilight mouse. Boom, boom, boom. His body flashed a few times, and the several twilight mice had lost their heads. The soul of light's eyes widened as he watched the twilight mice being killed one by Zen. Then, he realized that he should withdraw from the other shore. Just as he began to recite the illusion-breaking rune, he saw a handful of green sand pouring over like rain. The soul-restraining sand fell on the surface of his soul of light, locking him on the other shore. Now, as much as he wanted to leave, he couldn't. Elvinia clapped her hands to clean up the soul-restraining sand between her fingers. A small smile curled on her lips as she asked, "All this makes me want to know who will die now, as are you." The soul of light's desire to survive was very strong. After realizing that he was unable to leave the other shore, he turned around and wildly ran towards a passageway in the cave. After all, he had been trained in the Soul City, so his escape speed was not slow. If he met another person, he might have been able to escape, but unfortunately, he met Zen. Crack! Accompanied by a loud bolt of lightning, Zen suddenly appeared beside him. He stretched out his hand and gently pulled the soul of light. He was like a kite with a broken string, weightless, and was easily thrown back by Zen. Let me go," the man pleaded. His heart was pounding tremendously against his chest, and he struggled to catch his breath. "Besides ambushing us here, does the element spirit race have any other plans?" Zen asked in a firm tone. His eyes were sharp, as if they were to pierce through whatever lies this man might stutter. No, the man answered immediately, afraid that Zen didn't believe him. Fear was reflected in his eyes. Zen tried to look deeper to see if there was malice in his answer. He then added, "Who would have thought that so many Moonfire slaves couldn't do anything to you? I thought even one Moonfire slave would be enough. What had happened was beyond my imagination. Is this really the northwest corner of the Forbidden Rain City?" Zen asked again. He was still unsure whether to trust this man's answers, but he needed to understand the situation better. "Yes, you will reach it as long as you go up through this passage. There are some twilight mice along the way, but with your strength, you can pass through smoothly," the man said. Zen glanced at Elvinia, whose eyes flashed with killing intent. Elvinia nodded at him and a small smile formed on her thin and sharp lips. Before the man could react, Zen's arms slightly curled his head. Pop! The soul of light was like a fragile bubble, shattering and disappearing in the blink of an eye. They didn't really care who this person was. Since he was a human, it was most likely that he came from the Bearing race or the Divine Farmer race. As for where the real Doyle was and whether he was killed or not, they could only investigate after they left the other shore. Following the direction given by the soul of light, Zen and Elvinia soon saw flat steps. Their every move was done with caution and all their senses were alert. After climbing up a certain distance, they heard some squeaks ahead. Then, bean-sized eyes floated from the darkness on both sides of the steps. Sure enough, as the man said, there scattered many twilight mice in this passageway. Those Moonfire slaves are all dead below. I wouldn't mind killing the entire twilight mouse race as well. If you don't want to die, you can come up, Zen said coldly. His eyes were sharp and alert and he said those words in all seriousness. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The Moonfire slaves were arranged by the Twilight Mice. The Twilight Mice were shocked when they heard that all 9 of the Moonfire slaves had been killed. Even as creatures of stage 28 on the other shore, they were still not qualified to participate in a battle of this level. Moreover, the element spirit race did not give an order to let them attack Zen and Elvenia. Squeaks echoed and soon, the eyes glowing in the darkness disappeared one by one. After the Twilight Mice left, Zen continued to walk up with Elvenia. After they came out from a square well, they saw neatly arranged star rings. The soul of light didn't lie to us, Zen said, nodding his head slightly as he sized up the star rings. In the Lust world, there were many star rings on each stage. Almost every ruling civilization had a star ring. However, many civilizations were still not able to reach a high stage. Now that it was stage 28, the number of star rings had decreased significantly. There were only more than 100 star rings in front of them, which meant that only more than 100 ruling civilizations had once come here. After finding the human race's star ring, Zen immediately threw himself into it. Elvenia immediately followed, imitating Zen's posture. Then, the 2 of them turned into 2 white lights and flew into the sky. Stage 28 was under the rule of the element spirit race. If they knew that the Moonfire slaves had been killed, they would probably turn to the stage ruler. If that happened, there might be another fierce battle. Thus, the earlier they left, the better. In what seemed to be an instant, 2 beams of straight white light shuttled all the way and finally arrived at stage 29, where the Soul City was located. Chapter 3297, The Boiling Blood. A peak in blood-red color stood towering into the cloud. This was where the star ring of the human race was located. The circle of light in the middle of the star ring quivered, and 2 figures suddenly appeared in its vicinity. Once Zen's eyes adapted to the environment, he looked around and was instantly stunned. On that peak, there was a circular platform with about 7 or 8 star rings at its center. The ones ascending to this place weren't limited to the human race, other races also ascended to this place. Dozens of souls of light crowded around the circular platform. These souls of light had different forms. They belonged to various races, but for some reason, none of them belonged to the human race. When they saw Zen's and Elvenia's corporeal bodies, their eyes lit up. These 2 people, they have corporeal bodies. How do they do that? That human girl seems to be another shore creature. Since they could see Elvenia's features clearly, they naturally took her as another shore creature. Ignoring these souls of light, Zen walked to the edge of the round platform and looked around. There were many blood-red peaks in the Constant Glory stage. They were quite far away from each other and were surrounded by abysses. A lava-like red liquid flowed at the depth of those abysses. From stage 29 to above, the other shore will be extremely dangerous, Elvenia, who stood beside him, spoke. As you can see, the bottom of the Constant Glory stage is filled with red liquid known as boiling blood. Any creature that comes into contact with it will completely melt away. But it isn't dangerous, is it? Zen's gaze had already shifted from the bottom to the side of the peak. Paths that looked endless had been built among these peaks. As long as they didn't seek death and jump into the boiling blood, they would naturally be able to pass through safely. Moreover, Zen could fly in the air, so it was naturally easier for him to pass through. Human friend, the boiling blood at the bottom isn't a big deal, but don't forget that there are still those Garudas in the sky. A soul of light almost 30 feet tall suddenly came towards them. Garudas. Zen looked up. Vaguely, shadows of giant birds could be seen flying about behind the clouds. However, those birds seemed to do nothing else except circling around high in the sky. According to the information I've checked, we indeed have to be wary of them, Elvenia said as she nodded. The Garudas are the most powerful creatures on the Constant Glory stage. Even the other shore creatures are prey for those birds, let alone the souls of light. Souls of light were much more fragile than corporeal bodies. Even if one had entered Soul City, they would still be powerless, that was unless they could completely pass the test of Soul City, become a colorless soul, and enter the Holy Soul Realm. Yes, yes, yes. That's correct. The 30 feet tall soul of light came over and said, the situation on the Constant Glory stage is too dangerous. We've been staying here waiting for a chance to go to the Soul City. Since you 2 have corporeal bodies, could you please escort us there? I'm from the Wild Lion race. As long as you 2 are willing to escort me through, you just need to name your price. Quote. A hint of curiosity appeared on Zen's expression when he heard this. Are you trapped here? Yes. Those Garudas are cunning. We're safe only when we stay on this round platform. Once we step onto those paths, we'll be targeted by them, the member of the wild lion race said with a nod. A smaller soul of light beside him had already come to the edge of the round platform. He quietly took a step towards the path and said, "See for yourself if you don't believe us." The soul of light had just stood on the path for a short while when a gust of wind swept down from above. A huge winged shadow rushed down at an incredible speed and then landed next to the path. Nevertheless, the short soul of light managed to take back his foot before the Garuda rushed down. Chirp! The Garuda let out an angry cry. It then directed its beak fiercely towards the short soul of light to peck him. However, the moment its beak crossed the edge of the platform, a streak of blood-red lightning emerged out of thin air along with sizzle noises. The Garuda let out a miserable cry, quickly flapped its wings, and rushed back to the sky, leaving behind a lingering burnt smell in the air. "That's how it is," the short soul of light said. The 30-foot-tall soul of light chuckled and said, "Hiro, the Garuda will certainly bear a grudge after you teased it like this. When you walk through the path, you'll be its first target." Hiro said nonchalantly, "These birds are guarding this place all the time anyway. At worst, I'll just have to stay here for the rest of my life." When Zen heard their conversation, it finally dawned on him that these people had probably been trapped here for quite a long time. If the constant glory stage had always been like this, it was theoretically impossible for them to get through. He pondered the matter for a while and then said, "No, this is strange. If those Garudas have always been here, how did the others go to Soul City before?" "Everyone can only wait for an opportunity," Elvinia said. "I heard that as long as there is blood fog, the Garudas will never want to come down. That being the case, when the blood fog spreads, everyone will quickly rush to the Soul City where they'll thus be safe." "Then how often does the blood fog occur?" Zen asked. "We've stayed here for a long time, but we've yet to see the blood fog," another soul of light replied. The appearance of the blood fog was completely random. Sometimes, the blood fog could spread for more than half of the constant glory stage. Sometimes, even though there was blood fog, it could only cover a portion of the area, so they still couldn't go to the Soul City. "Then do you want us to fight against those strange birds?" Zen asked. "Exactly," the short soul of light said. "It's too dangerous." Elvinia vetoed the idea. "Those Garudas are the most powerful creatures here. If they swarm over, you won't be able to defend yourself against them." Although she was confident in Zen, she didn't want him to take risks. Elvinia's objection made those souls of light disappointed. One after another, they went back to their original positions. Some of them even chanted the illusion-breaking rune and withdrew from the other shore. Right at this moment, the voice of the primeval Lord of Heaven suddenly rang in Zen's mind. "This is really strange. Has the blood fog spell already gone extinct in the constant glory stage?" "Blood fog spell? What is that?" Zen asked. "Well, it seems that the element spirit race have worked hard over the years to erase a lot of things," the primeval Lord of Heaven said with a helpless smile. "The Garudas on the constant glory stage are indeed powerful. Even the ruler of this stage is a Garuda. This is indeed a rare occurrence. Generally speaking, the creatures in the dark region were much more powerful than the creatures in the light region. However, it was indeed rare that both the dark region and the light region of the constant glory stage were dominated by Garudas. Fortunately, the Garudas were very arrogant. No matter how hard the element spirit race tried, they had never been able to win them over. Although these birds were dangerous and cruel, they didn't listen to the element spirit race. The Garudas that stood on the top of the constant glory stage were most afraid of the boiling blood in the abyss. In fact, most of the other shore creatures on the constant glory stage relied on the boiling blood to survive. After the primeval Lord of Heaven told Zen the origins of the gigantic Garudas, he continued, "Long ago, someone had discovered that the blood fog could drive the Garudas away. Using the blood fog spell to summon the boiling blood fog was practically the necessary means to pass through the constant glory stage. I never expected that no one knows about it now." Chapter 3298, Before the Gate. The other shore hadn't always been the same. Since the primeval Lord of Heaven and the others hadn't returned to the high stages in a long time, they didn't know that they had undergone earth-shattering changes. Zen was hesitant now. He wondered whether he should listen to Elvinia and leave when the blood fog appeared, or just barge through. It would be great if the blood fog spell that the primeval Lord of Heaven had mentioned really existed. "Primeval Lord of Heaven, does the blood fog spell still have an effect?" Zen asked doubtfully. The primeval Lord of Heaven said, "You'll know when you try." The blood fog spell was similar to the illusion-breaking rune and was easy to master. Zen had mastered it in less than 5 minutes. He then walked to the edge of the round platform. Elvinia and the others were confused at Zen's behavior and thought that he was about to tease the Garuda like the short soul of light. But they heard Zen vaguely chant something. While Zen had recited, the blood in the abyss at the foot of the mountain boiled even more fiercely, as if a fierce beast was emerging from it. A trace of bright red blood floated up into the air. Elvinia and the others gasped, their eyes widening in shock. How has the blood fog appeared so soon? He can summon the blood fog. I've never heard of such a method before. The blood fog spell was not a complicated method, but the element spirit race had erased it from history for a long time. There still remained a small number of people who had mastered this method, but no outsider knew of it. As they watched the blood fog spreading, the souls of light rushed cheerily into the path. But the blood fog seemed to consider Zen as the center and spread around him. It wouldn't move if Zen didn't move forward. This caused the souls of light to come to halt and wait for Zen to take the lead. Let's go, Zen said with a smile. Elvinia, who was standing behind Zen, whispered to him, did that senior master teach you this? Yeah, Zen said, nodding. After he had carried the book, he had owned a number of abilities within himself that he couldn't explain. Elvinia knew the truth, and Zen also hadn't the slightest intention of hiding it from her. They had no idea who had built the paths that connected those otherwise isolated peaks. When the Garudas saw people moving ahead on the path below, they spread their wings and pounced down upon the path. But the moment they approached the blood fog, they flapped their wings and flew backwards, crying out in disgust. As Zen and his companions moved along the path, the blood fog moved along with them. It faded away about an hour after it started following Zen. At this, Zen chanted the blood fog spell again, and the blood fog became denser and denser once again. They had just passed the last peak when a huge blood-red peak loomed ahead of them. The surrounding small peaks were nothing compared to this one. At the top of this peak was a huge platform, on which floated a blurry city. Is that the Soul City? Zen muttered, looking at the blurry city with wide eyes. It was more a mirage than a city. The city wasn't real, but an illusion that sat at the top of the peak. I think it is, said Elvinia, her eyes burning with excitement. She had read some information about the Soul City, but this was the first time she was seeing it with her own eyes. But it's just an illusion, Zen said with a frown. What he was seeing was beyond his expectations. Not at all, said a soul of light from behind him. The reason why they were able to come here so easily was because of Zen. They didn't have anything with which to repay him, which was why they were willing to give out information they knew. The soul of light continued, the Soul City itself is made up of souls. It is said that it sucked tens of millions of souls before becoming what it is now. So the city you see is similar to a soul of light. The city formed by souls of light is so huge. Zen gasped, shocked. A short while later, he and Elvinia passed through the long, winding path and reached the top of the peak. The blood fog that had followed him dissipated here. The gate of the Soul City was huge and grayish-brown. Two gigantic square columns sat on both sides. When Zen walked to one of the columns, he could hear a moan emanating from within. The square column itself was formed by souls of light. They could see dark brown masses within it floated ceaselessly, with many strange faces on them. Are these souls of light still alive? Zen asked with surprise. Of course they are alive, but they are and will always be a part of the Soul City. They can't be reborn forever. The primeval Lord of Heaven's voice rang out. It looks like I have underestimated the Soul City, Zen muttered, growing serious. The Soul City tested the souls of light. Only indigo souls at the ultimate level were qualified to enter the city. As it opened once every 132 hours, most of the souls of light would leave the other shore after arriving and would enter the city when its door opened. Most of the souls of light that stayed at the entrance of the city hadn't reached the ultimate level of the indigo soul yet. They either sat cross-legged at the entrance and cultivated, or tried to collect enough soul crystal to strengthen themselves. Elvinia, wait for me here, said Zen. Zen's physical body was here, but his soul of light was still in the lower stage. If he wanted to enter the Soul City, he had to come with his soul of light. Elvinia had a natural advantage over him since her physical body was just similar to an armor, which protected her soul on the other shore. It was not as troublesome as Zen's body. Now that he had sent Elvinia here, he had to bring his soul of light up. Elvinia nodded in response and waited. It took some time for Zen's soul of light to arrive here from the lower stage. Without the protection of his physical body, Zen's soul of light, which was at the ultimate level of the indigo soul, was relatively weak and he still had to pass through stage 28. Fortunately, the element spirit race paid most of their attention to his physical body, which was why they didn't do a strict inspection of the souls of light. What was more, it wouldn't be easy for them to recognize Zen's soul of light. After safely crossing stage 28, Zen quickly came to stage 29, the constant glory stage. He used the blood fog spell to move forward. It took him more than half a day of non-stop journey to finally appear at the entrance of the Soul City and meet Elvenia. The two of them continued to wait at the gate of the Soul City. A day later, more and more souls of light appeared at the gate. They included members of the Separate Abyss race, the Azure Wolf race, the New Moon race, and the human race. Souls of light of all races had emerged. The previously quiet square in front of the Soul City became noisy almost instantly. To enter the Soul City, you need reach the ultimate level of the Indigo Soul. You will be courting death if you don't. I still have the soul crystal that I'm selling at a low price. Only 3 million soul pills per finger-sized trunk, an ear mouse exclaimed, seizing the opportunity to sell its soul crystal. Chapter 3299, The Soul Pillars. A smile appeared on Zen's face when he heard the voice of the ear mouse hawking its soul crystal. Normally, a finger-sized chunk of soul crystal could be bought with 1 million soul pills. Now, however, these ear mice asked for 3 million. Their greed was really insatiable. Nevertheless, the souls of light crowding around the gate of the Soul City were in a hurry to pass the trial. If they really fell just a little short of the required level, they would most likely choose to pay 3 million soul pills. Besides, the strong warriors who had reached this level must have a high status in their respective races, so they could afford so many soul pills. After a while, the gate of the Soul City slowly opened. The moment the gate opened, numerous faces of the souls of light appeared on the gate and let out incessant wails. At the same time, a vast amount of soul auras flooded out of the city. Zen had seen the auras of the souls of light of Eternal Realm Masters, such as Eastern Emperor Tai and Emperor Charm. However, even the auras of Eternal Warriors could not be compared to those in front of him. The Soul City was formed by trillions of souls after all. The gate is open, I hope I can go further this time. Every time I came, I always failed to move forward. I've been stuck in that step for years. As soon as the gate was opened, it was immediately jammed with countless people trying to enter the city. Let's go in, said Zen. He and Elvenia immediately followed the other souls of light into the Soul City. The moment Zen set foot in the Soul City, he was immediately wrapped in the ubiquitous soul auras. Generally speaking, the soul aura could be seen as leaked consciousness, and consciousness itself could be said as one's deepest thought or desire. For example, when someone's desire to kill was strong, their soul aura would become extremely sharp, just like a sharpened knife. A weak soul exposed to a murderous aura would feel very uncomfortable. If it was too weak, it would even be annihilated directly. If it was a gentle aura, it could comfort the other party and even had the effect of repairing the soul. There were countless souls in the Soul City, and each had their own consciousness, so the soul auras contained within were incomparably complicated. They had a very cumbersome impact on Zen. He seemed to be able to listen to the thoughts of millions of people at the same time. Some of them were crying, some were drowned in sadness, some were feeling like outcasts, some were angry, some were bubbling with excitement, some others were filled with happiness. Elvenia was also experiencing the same thing as Zen. It was different from real hearing. Listening to these souls could not be gotten rid of, and they had to bear with it as long as they were in the Soul City. In fact, the test had already begun when they stepped into the Soul City. Fortunately, Zen and Elvenia had already reached the ultimate level of the Indigo Soul, so their souls were strong and very stable. Not far from them, a soul of light casually walked into the Soul City. Before long, however, he staggered. The pressure of the complex soul auras gradually increased as he went farther into the city, and he couldn't endure it. He tried to cover his ears to escape from the auras but to no avail. Once the auras became too overbearing to bear, he finally let out a scream and used all his strength to rush out of the Soul City. He managed to step out of the Soul City right as his soul power was exhausted, but he soon fell on the ground, dying. Many people in the city noticed this scene, and most of them had pity in their gazes. That guy is so bold. How dare he come to the Soul City before reaching the ultimate level of the Indigo Soul? It's courting death. Fortunately, he still had the brain to escape when he couldn't hold on any longer. Otherwise, he would have become a part of the Soul City. After they walked in the Soul City for some time, some pillars appeared in front of them. The pillars were only half a person tall, and they could climb up by leaping. One after another, those who walked in the front started to leap onto the pillars and then sat cross-legged. When Zen was sizing the pillars up, Elvenia said, "These are the soul pillars. Let's go up too." Soul pillars? Zen repeated curiously. Yes, the test in the Soul City is completed on top of these soul pillars. As long as you pass this test, you will have a colorless soul and reach the Holy Soul realm, said Elvinia. She got this information after rummaging through a number of books. As for what exactly they would experience on the soul pillars, she actually didn't really know. Zen nodded. After finding an unoccupied soul pillar, he gently jumped up and then sat down on top of it with his legs crossed. Elvinia found a soul pillar beside Zen's and did the same. After everyone sat down, numbers appeared on the soul pillars. Both Elvinia's and Zen's soul pillars showed 1, while that of the soul of light on Zen's right side showed 63. A number above 1, 300 even appeared on an occupied soul pillar quite a distance away. While Zen looked around, Elvinia said, "These numbers should represent how many times we've entered the Soul City. It's our first time, so our soul pillars show 1. The number on that pillar is more than 1, 300, so the soul of light sitting on it has entered the Soul City for more than 1,000 times." Zen asked. "Exactly," Elvinia answered with a nod. After Zen sat on the soul pillar, it gave no response. Nevertheless, more and more souls of light entered the Soul City, and some humans also entered in groups. A group of about 6 or 7 people walked towards Elvinia upon entering the area of the soul pillars. "Princess Elvinia," someone shouted. Just like the creatures on the other shore, Elvinia had a physical body in the Soul City, so her presence was very conspicuous. The disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace naturally noticed her at a glance. Elvinia looked at the soul of light and asked, "Who are you?" "My name is Gabriel," the man replied. "I'm Carver," another man introduced himself. "I'm Libby," a woman said. These people were all disciples from the 3rd floor. They were quite famous in the Oneness Sky Palace. Elvinia had naturally seen them before, but she wasn't too familiar with them. Now that they introduced themselves like this, she naturally knew who they were. Elvinia smiled and said, "What a coincidence. I guess I'll make a breakthrough to the Holy Soul Realm along with you guys." Entering the Soul City and reaching the Holy Soul Realm was never an easy task. It was an extremely painful test for souls. Some people gave up after trying several times, unwilling to take this test again for the rest of their lives. Those who could come to the Soul City for hundreds or thousands of times were the persistent ones. It was the first time Elvinia had entered the Soul City. In the eyes of others, she was a mere newcomer. "Princess Elvinia, work hard," Gabriel encouraged. Upon introducing herself, Libby looked at the soul pillar next to Elvinia's and asked, "Princess Elvinia, may I know who this man is?" In fact, she already knew the answer. After the battle in the Oneness Sky Palace, she knew that Elvinia had a close relationship with Zen. The man who came to stage 29 with Elvinia must be that powerful Zen. "This is Zen," Elvinia replied curtly. While Zen didn't return to the land of sword grief after the battle with the Sun Crow race, the story of his deeds had undoubtedly spread to that place, turning him into a household name. Before Gorin went to the Dragon Cliff, he said in the land of sword grief, "If it wasn't because our Oneness Sky Palace had Zen, the human race in the Bloom Divine Province would have been exterminated." The significance of Zen's presence was self-evident. Chapter 3300, Reading the Sanskrit Words. Together with the other disciples of the 3rd floor, Gabriel observed Zen's soul of light with utmost curiosity. Considering Zen's soul of light alone, it might seem there was nothing absolutely remarkable about him. After all, anyone who was able to enter the Soul City was obviously at the ultimate level of the Indigo Soul. People like Gabriel and Carver had been staying at this level for a long time. Therefore, Zen and Elvinia, who had just made it to stage 29, were still considered as novices here. However, Zen was a famous disciple of the Oneness Sky Palace. Almost everyone had heard of his name before. Among the disciples in the entire land of sword grief, Libby had seen the most of the battle against the Sun Crow race. Back then, she was a novice in the Oneness Array. On the other hand, Gabriel and Carver only had the option to join the 12 passes and become Oneness Generals. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Zen. Nice to finally meet you." Gabriel, Carver, and the other disciples of the 3rd floor all came forward, cupped their hands and bowed slightly as they greeted Zen. They all seemed too enthused. With that, Zen also bowed slightly to them. "This is the very first time that Elvinia and I have entered the Soul City. Thus, we are very unfamiliar with this place. I hope you can lend us a hand," he said politely. "No problem. It is safe to say that with your strength, it won't be that difficult to pass the test of the Soul City," replied Gabriel with a reassuring smile. "Is that so? Well, that is quite flattering." Zen humbly accepted the compliment with a wave of his hand. All of a sudden, his soul pillar flashed and began to vibrate slightly while he was still speaking. Carver noticed this as well. So he said, the soul pillars are about to ascend. Come, let's choose our own pillars. There were lots of soul pillars all over the entire soul city. Many of the ones located behind Zen were not occupied. With a gentle leap, Carver, Gabriel, and the other disciples skillfully boarded the soul pillars and sat down cross-legged. The number on Libby's soul pillar was 17. This meant that she had already come to the soul city for the 17th time. Carver's number was 198, while Gabriel's was 230. The two of them had been to the soul city many times before. With Zen's strength, it'll be very easy for him to pass the test of the soul city, right? Carver whispered to Gabriel. Gabriel merely snorted at this. As far as I know, he did not gain those great achievements in the battle against the Sun Crows because of his own strength. He only attained them because he received lots of help from some supreme masters. Being disciples on the 3rd floor of the Land of Sword Grief, Gabriel and Carver felt extremely proud of themselves. Libby was the only person they admired within the entire place. To be honest, they were quite uncomfortable with Zen's arrival. Gabriel was the son of the Bright Mountains leader. His father's death was a great blow to him. Needless to say, he did everything in his power to investigate what happened to his father. Therefore, he knew more about Zen's deeds than ordinary people. I see, it really was quite unthinkable that a man who didn't even pass the test of the Soul City could stand against the mighty warriors of the Sun Crow race. All of the people in the Oneness Sky Palace have even admired him as if he was a god. This will be too much for him, Carver said. Well, it's his first time to sit on the Soul Pillar. Judging from the looks of it, he doesn't even know what kind of test he is going to face. It'll be fun watching him make a fool of himself later. Gabriel smirked mockingly. At this very moment, the soul pillars trembled once again. Slowly, they began to rise. The soul pillar that Zen had sat on was rising as well. It gradually ascended by 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. As soon as the soul pillars rose, a brown cloud started to press down from above the soul city. The cloud seemed to contain a mix of countless souls and innumerable twisted faces that struggled and howled inside it. The soul cloud continued pressing down as the soul pillars went up. The soul pressure became more and more intense as Zen continued to approach the cloud. Could this be the test of the soul city? Zen mumbled to himself with a frown. He wondered whether merely dealing with the soul pressure was enough to strengthen one's own soul of light. From the moment Zen began to cultivate his soul, he had felt no change yet. Everyone's soul had reached a limit after reaching the ultimate level of the indigo soul. Even if they absorbed more soul crystal, they still wouldn't be able to advance to a higher level. Therefore, Zen didn't believe that the test of the soul city was to just deal with the soul pressure. There had to be a different trial hidden behind this. The soul pillars had now ascended to 50 feet. They rose to 100 feet while the pressure kept rising. Zen noticed that they were now nearing 200 feet. As soon as the soul pillars reached 200 feet, they stopped. The soul cloud above also stopped descending. It hovered just 10 feet away from all of the souls of light. At this close distance, Zen could observe the soul cloud more clearly. There were all sorts of strange faces and some sharp tiny crystals swirling within the cloud. These tiny crystals were the ones that reflected colorful lights from the soul cloud. What were they supposed to do now? Were they going to enter the soul cloud? All of a sudden, they heard strange sounds coming from within the cloud just as Zen was pondering about what their next move should be. At first, they sounded like unintelligible screams. However, they started to become even more peculiar now. After listening to them for a while, Zen noticed something. The tones and pronunciation of the screams were becoming intensely rhythmic. Now, they sounded like a pleasant song. Wait a second, it's a song. Zen gazed at the cloud intently. His face registered a look of astonishment. Realizing this, it gave him an utterly bizarre feeling. It felt like the cloud had taken the form of a young girl who was singing. However, this young girl didn't have a mouth, so obviously, she wouldn't be able to sing. Therefore, she was using the mouths of the souls in the cloud. She created a song by gathering lots of different sounds together. At this point, the voice of the primeval Lord of Heaven rang clearly once again. Listen carefully, Zen. This song contains the comprehension of the colorless soul. The comprehension of the colorless soul is in the song. Zen repeated as he stared incredulously at the soul cloud. What shall I do? I can't understand it at all. Zen was evidently stunned. The primeval Lord of Heaven looked at him and smiled. Well, do you understand Sanskrit words? Unfortunately, Zen couldn't understand Sanskrit words either. He didn't have the incredible ability to decipher the Sanskrit words instantly, just like Jeffrey. If he truly wanted to decipher the Sanskrit words methodically, it would definitely take him a very long time. Coming out of his reverie, Zen had a sudden realization. Do you mean to say that this song? His voice trailed away as he waited for the answer. Yes, these are their voices. The primeval Lord of Heaven confirmed what Zen had on his mind. It was well known that Sanskrit words were incomprehensible within the chaos. If people really wanted to read and understand them, they had to decipher them first. However, this method was time-consuming. Meanwhile, Jeffrey had merely translated the Sanskrit words without even knowing how to read them. In actuality, Sanskrit words could be read. However, there wasn't a single person in the chaos who could read Sanskrit words instantly. It turns out those Sanskrit words are read in such a strange and baffling way, Zen mused. He tilted his head to the side and listened carefully. Based on his observation, there were times when the sounds were rising and falling in cadence and then suddenly becoming delicate and subtle. To him, they seemed like a poem or a song. They were like people scolding each other in the marketplace. They could only be understood mentally. Therefore, they could not be described by mere words. After listening closely for a while, Zen smiled bitterly. How will I be able to cultivate the colorless soul and reach the holy soul realm with this? I can't quite make sense of these chaotic and irregular sounds.